Are you ready to journey through the mind's most perplexing illusions? Each level will unveil a mind-bending phenomenon that challenges your perception of reality, leaving you both intrigued and ready for a peaceful slumber. Let's start with Level 1. Imagine yourself in a room so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat, not metaphorically, literally. The pulse in your ears, the creak of your joints, the slow expansion of your lungs. It's the kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but pressing. A silence that doesn't soothe, it listens back. In 1951, an experiment in Minneapolis quietly made history. Deep underground, in an anechoic chamber lined with wedges of fiberglass and floating on springs, researchers created a space without echo, without sound. Visitors to that chamber reported an eerie sensation. In the absence of noise, their minds began to invent it. A faint buzzing, a distant whisper, breathing that didn't belong to them. For many, the silence didn't feel empty, it felt haunted. Your brain, it turns out, doesn't like silence. It's tuned to patterns, rhythms, input. When those vanish, the auditory cortex begins to scan for signal in the noise, and when it finds none, it creates one. Phantom sounds rise up from memory, expectation, and imagination. A drip of water that never falls. Footsteps just beyond the wall. It's called the inverted silence echo. When absence becomes so loud, your mind fills it with ghosts. In ancient monasteries, monks practicing prolonged silence often described hearing voices. Not divine, not demonic, just present. In sensory deprivation tanks, modern floaters report muffled conversations and imaginary melodies. These aren't hallucinations in the clinical sense. They're the brain stretching, searching, narrating. Even now, in your room at night when the world falls quiet, notice how your mind rustles. A hum from the walls. The memory of a clock that no longer ticks. The echo of something that was never said aloud. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the space in which your mind begins to speak. Shall I continue with the next theory? You wake each morning with the quiet assumption that you are still here, that the self behind your eyes is the same as yesterday, the same preferences, the same voice in your head, the same history unspooling behind you. But beneath this comforting continuity lies something stranger. What you call you may not be a singular stable entity, but a mirage, an ever-refreshing illusion stitched together from memory, attention, and fleeting impressions. Imagine a flickering lantern in a hallway of mirrors. Each second, a new reflection appears, close enough to resemble the last, but never truly identical. Neuroscience suggests that your sense of self is not a fixed flame, but a series of momentary reconstructions. Your brain, rather than accessing a constant you, rapidly assembles a plausible version from scattered neural inputs, a memory here, a sensation there, an emotional echo drifting in. Walk through your daily routines, the brushing of teeth, the tying of shoes, the silent decisions made without reflection. These actions are guided not by a permanent identity, but by patterns laid down through habit and recalled just in time. Strip away the context, change the lighting, the surroundings, the language, and you may begin to feel it, the gentle unmooring of identity. In Buddhist philosophy, this idea appears as anatta, the doctrine of no self, that what we cling to as a singular I is just a bundle of ever-shifting processes. Western psychology finds echoes too, in the narrative self, a story the brain tells itself to keep chaos at bay. So, when you close your eyes tonight, notice the space behind your thoughts, the one who watches, the one who recalls, the one who dreams. It might not be the same one who will wake tomorrow, and yet somehow you'll feel unchanged, as if the mirage has always been real. You reach for the blue mug, not the red one, and only afterward do you say, I just prefer the weight of this one. But you didn't notice its weight. Not really. Your hand moved first. The explanation came later, as if it had always been part of the plan. This quiet rearranging of cause and effect happens more often than we like to admit. Decisions arise from undercurrents we don't fully see, whispers of emotion, fleeting urges, half-remembered associations, and only after the moment has passed does the mind begin its careful stitching of logic into the seam. In the quiet streets of 18th century Paris, a man named Etienne was once praised for his methodical choices in business and romance. But journals later revealed a different rhythm, a sudden marriage proposal after a sleepless night, an investment made in haste upon hearing a merchant's passing tone of urgency. His reasons, written neatly days after, felt as if they had been decided before, not after. We believe we're captains steering a rational ship. Often, we're passengers post-fact, scripting the voyage long after the sails have caught wind. This phenomenon is known as confabulation, the brain's gentle lie, told not to deceive, but to preserve the illusion of order. The phantom logic stitch appears not as a jolt, but a soft correction, a memory edited, a reason inserted, a story smoothed. It feels natural, even comforting. And yet, it reveals how often our inner compass is steered by forces we do not command. Imagine yourself watching an old film reel, only to realize some scenes were spliced in later, matching tone and costume perfectly. You can't tell where the edits were made, but you trust the story anyway. We all do. And perhaps that trust, that quiet patchwork of cause and meaning, is how we stay whole in a world of unpredictable winds. Imagine yourself in a small wooden cabin. No electricity, no humming refrigerator, no passing cars, no chatter drifting through the walls. The world has gone silent. At first, it's peaceful. You can hear the creak of your own breath, the soft pulse behind your ears. But wait long enough, and another sound emerges, one not from the outside, but from within. The steady murmur of your own thoughts, not shouted, not urgent, just louder than before. In the quiet, your mind fills the space, a list of things undone, a memory you didn't mean to revisit, a worry, almost shy in daylight, now suddenly articulate. Silence, it turns out, is not empty. It's a magnifier. And the quieter the world becomes, the more pressure it places on the noise inside you. In 1951, deep underground in a soundproof chamber at Orfield Labs, scientists created one of the quietest spaces on Earth. It absorbs 99.99% of all sound, and those who enter describe a strange, almost unreal experience. You begin to hear your heartbeat, then the faint whisper of your lungs expanding, and eventually, your blood pulsing in your veins. Some cannot stay longer than a few minutes, not because anything happens, but because nothing does. In ancient monasteries, silence was a form of discipline. Monks would go weeks or months without speaking, not to escape noise, but to confront the noise they carried inside. Stillness was not rest, it was a mirror. And what it showed was not always calm. You might think silence soothes, that it's what we need in a chaotic world. But too much of it, too quickly, becomes a kind of weight, a pressure to feel something, to hear something. Even if it's just your own mind pacing in circles, asking, why does it feel louder, the quieter it gets? Sometimes, we don't fear silence itself. We fear what it reveals. And in that strange echo chamber between your ears, where no real sound exists, something else stirs. Not noise, but presence. Relentless, vivid presence. And that can be louder than anything. Shall I continue with the next segment? You carry it quietly. Not a memory exactly, not even a moment you can name. Just a sense that something was once your fault. But the details have long dissolved, like old ink washed away by time. Still, the weight remains. A residue, guilt with no origin, like ash from a fire you don't remember starting. Psychologists call it moral incongruence, a soft dissonance between who you are now and the shadow of who you used to be, whether you meant to change or not. Often, this sensation drifts in from the past, disguised as fatigue or melancholy, a sudden quiet in the chest when nothing's wrong. The body, remembering what the conscious mind no longer does. In medieval monasteries, Monks spoke of scrupulosity, a spiritual heaviness, where even imagined sins sparked real anguish, a misplaced word, a passing thought. They walked in silence for hours, heads bowed under guilt that had no evidence, no witness, only the echo of a wrongness they couldn't name. Their confessions stretched on, pages of imagined sins, fears they had failed to repent correctly. Even their dreams were policed. Today, this echoes in subtler ways. You might apologize for things you didn't do, avoid joy because it feels unearned, or feel a tension rise around people who once knew you, though they've long forgotten whatever might have happened. It's the ghost of accountability without a crime. The nervous system still alert, still bracing for a consequence that never arrives. Imagine yourself peeling away layers of memory like wallpaper, and somewhere underneath, faint outlines of decisions made too quickly, silences kept too long, people you couldn't help. And though you've forgiven yourself, or tried to, some quiet part of you still wears the weight. And yet, even invisible dust can be swept. Sometimes, just noticing the heaviness is the first lightness. Imagine yourself standing in the kitchen, the soft hum of the refrigerator behind you. Your hands are moving, reaching for a glass, turning on the tap, but your mind is slow to arrive. There's a gap, just a sliver, between action and awareness. A pause where you exist in motion, but not in presence. It's not quite dreaming, not quite waking, just a quiet dislocation, as if awareness has stepped out for a moment and left your body on autopilot. This phenomenon is more common than most admit. Not the cinematic version of sleepwalking, roaming the night in dramatic trances, but a subtler split. Scientists call it dissociated arousal, a liminal state where the brain begins to wake in parts. Motor functions switch on before higher consciousness catches up. You can walk, turn lights on, check your phone. You can even reply in murmured half-sentences, but you're not really there. In sleep labs, researchers have observed patients performing complex routines while still in stage N1 or N2 sleep, light sleep. One subject laced their shoes, another typed coherent emails. Hours later, none remembered doing it. There was no dream imagery, no inner monologue, just a flicker of action, and a blank space where the memory should have formed. Some cultures describe this state as soul delay, the belief that the spirit lags behind the body upon waking. Others see it as a thinning veil between realities. But the brain tells a simpler story. Awareness and function don't always rise in unison. Sometimes one wakes before the other. Sometimes you move before you arrive. You may have felt it too, after naps, during early mornings, in dim hotel rooms. A moment when you blink and wonder how long you've been brushing your teeth, staring out the window, or scrolling without purpose. The body moved. The mind followed late. It's unsettling, but harmless. A reminder that even consciousness travels in layers. Would you like the next one? There are moments when a thought doesn't arrive as language, or even feeling, but as something stranger. A vague architecture, a weightless shape. It presses against the edge of your mind like a word on the tip of your tongue, but there's no word, only geometry. Curved, angular, impossibly textured, and utterly silent. Your mind flinches at it, then tries to smooth it out into something graspable, an idea, a sentence, a name. But it wasn't made for words. This is the thought shape inversion, the quiet glitch in cognition when meaning arrives before it's been translated, before your brain wraps it in grammar, tones it with emotion, or fits it into logic. The shape is raw cognition, unfiltered, pre-verbal, and fleeting. Imagine yourself in a dim room, reaching into a box of unfamiliar objects. You touch something smooth, then jagged, then soft, but coiled. You don't know what it is, but something in you reacts. That's what these mental shapes feel like. They can carry intent, urgency, or memory. Without offering any clear source, artists, musicians, even mathematicians sometimes speak of ideas arriving this way, as complete structures, sensed rather than spoken. The challenge isn't in thinking the idea, but in translating it. into paint, into proof, into words that feel like an echo of the original shape, never quite whole. Some psychologists suggest these mental shapes are relics of pre-linguistic thought, primal, nonverbal patterns from early childhood, or deeper still, woven into the unconscious. Others suspect they're glimpses of parallel processing, moments where different parts of the brain brush together and leave behind an impression. So, if you've ever felt a thought before you understood it, if something abstract curled inside your awareness and vanished before you could name it, don't dismiss it. That shape might have been your truest thought. The words just arrived too late. Imagine sitting alone in a quiet room, eyes closed, attempting to watch your own thoughts drift by, like clouds, like traffic, like something other than you. You tell yourself, I am observing. But who is the I? And who is the one being observed? This subtle split between watcher and watched feels intuitive at first. A common meditation prompt, a mental mirror held up to itself. But as you lean in, something begins to dissolve. The more intently you observe your mind, the more slippery it becomes. Thoughts shift, feelings blur. The observer transforms into the observed, folding in on itself like a reflection, trying to see its own source. In ancient forest monasteries, monks would describe this collapse with soft phrases, the eye looking at itself, or the candle lighting its own flame. It was not confusion, but revelation. A quiet confrontation with the fact that your mind cannot stand outside itself, no matter how hard it tries. You might think of it as trying to bite your own teeth, or as a camera turning inward, infinitely zooming until there's only grain, then blur, then silence. In neuroscience, some describe this as metacognitive recursion, the loop of the mind monitoring itself without a fixed vantage point. There is no solid self that watches, only awareness, shifting and shaped by the act of attention itself. The rhythm of your life, too, echoes this loop. You narrate your actions to yourself. I am doing this. I feel that. But these explanations often arise just a half second too late. The self becomes a story trailing behind the moment, a voice writing subtitles for a film that's already past the scene. So, as you lie here tonight, drifting toward sleep, notice the watcher in you softening, not disappearing, just loosening. There is no need to catch every thought, no need to decide which part is you. Let the mirror blur, let the loop rest, let watching and being collapse into one quiet field, where even observation dissolves into peace. Imagine yourself reading a single word, a simple one, like door. You say it aloud once, then again, then again. With each repetition, the edges blur. The meaning starts to slip. The letters look strange, unfamiliar. Door becomes a shape, a noise, an odd collection of sounds no longer tethered to wood, hinges, or the idea of entry. You've just witnessed semantic satiation, a trick of the brain where meaning dissolves under too much focus. It's not just language. This is a window into how the mind handles concepts. Everything you understand, chair, freedom, love, is supported by a scaffold of repetition, habit, and unconscious agreement. But under the microscope of sustained attention, those structures begin to unravel. Familiar things feel foreign. Known words fracture into echoes. In 1907, German psychologist Ewald Hering first noted this disintegration. He repeated the same word over and over, expecting clarity, but found distortion. Later studies confirmed it. Neurons tied to language fatigue quickly when overloaded. The brain quiets them, as if protecting itself from redundancy, and in that quieting, meaning flickers and fades. Now picture a medieval scribe copying the same prayer 100 times by candlelight. Perhaps, after the 60th repetition, the word grace lost its grace, became just ink on vellum, a mark, a rhythm. Perhaps the repetition wasn't about clarity, but surrender, letting go of meaning to find something beneath it. Even monks knew, when the same mantra is whispered long enough, it stops being a thought and becomes something else, texture, vibration, breath. We often think truth is revealed in focus. That clarity comes from looking closer. But the concept decay illusion reminds us, sometimes meaning is only stable at a glance. Stare too long, and the illusion wavers. The label peels from the object, and we're left not with knowledge, but with shape, sound, syllable. With the quiet awareness that even our firmest concepts are paper-thin and easily torn by too much attention. Sometimes it arrives as a scent, a warm drift of summer wind through unfamiliar streets, triggering a memory that hasn't yet been lived, or a song playing quietly in the background, new to your ears but already saturated with emotion, as if it belongs to a goodbye you haven't had yet. You pause, unsettled by the sensation. It's not déjà vu, not exactly. There's no confusion, no sense of repetition, just a soft ache for something out ahead of you. A longing tied to a moment your body seems to recognize, but your mind doesn't. Not yet. This is the phenomenon some researchers loosely call anticipatory nostalgia. The brain, ever predictive, sometimes builds memory-like structures in advance. It notices patterns, sketches improbable futures, and begins assigning emotion to them. Almost like staging a home before someone moves in. You might feel it before a major life change, a graduation, a move, the final week of a fading friendship. Your present self gazes forward, but your mind loops back from that future vantage point, already mourning what will be lost, already treasuring what hasn't ended yet. You begin to miss what is still here. And somehow, that gentle grief embeds itself into the very moment you're living. In ancient cultures, time wasn't always linear. Some calendars looped like spirals, returning each year to spiritual echoes of the past and future. Shamans would speak of dreams where tomorrow bled into yesterday, where ancestors whispered of choices not yet made. Perhaps this is what you're feeling, a leak in the timeline, the soft spill of a future feeling arriving early. Imagine yourself walking into a room you've never entered before and feeling instantly homesick, not because you've been there, but because someday you will be. And a piece of you, some quiet, invisible thread, already knows how much it'll mean. It's not madness, it's memory, running slightly ahead of schedule. Imagine yourself resting your eyes for just a moment, a blink perhaps, or a gentle closing of the lids in a quiet room. You don't sleep, not fully, but when you open them again, something feels off. The light has changed. A sound you hadn't noticed before has stopped. You check the clock. Was it 5 seconds or 5 minutes? Time doesn't say. It simply moved without your permission. This quiet warping of time perception is more common than you'd think. Neurologists call it microsleep when it edges into seconds-long unconsciousness. But what we're speaking of here is subtler. You're not asleep. You're not fully awake. Your brain enters a low-power state, reducing its tracking of the outside world, including the passage of time. When your eyes are closed, even briefly, your internal clock becomes untethered. Time, for the most part, is not measured by clocks, but by events, thoughts, sensations, changes in the environment. Shut off those inputs, and time loses its reference points. A second becomes elastic. A moment stretches, or collapses. In ancient meditation practices, monks described closing their eyes and returning to find entire hours gone, though they felt as if only a breath had passed. In contrast, soldiers in war zones report moments that feel endlessly stretched, seconds of stillness that felt like hours as adrenaline froze perception. When you blink, your brain actually suppresses visual input, but not just visually. It suspends awareness briefly to prevent disruption. In those blinks, sometimes we vanish from the timeline entirely. Not enough to lose the thread, but enough to loosen it. You may have noticed it while riding in a car or listening to rain. The in-between moments when your eyelids fall and rise, and yet something, subtle and temporal, has shifted. Time leaked a little, or pooled up quietly behind your eyes. In the space behind a blink, the universe repositions itself. You're in a conversation. You smile when expected. You nod at the right words. You even hear your own voice responding. But beneath the choreography, something feels delayed, as if your personality is trailing just behind you, not quite caught up. You answer to your name, yet it sounds like a label someone else once wore. You inhabit your life, but like a borrowed coat, warm, familiar, but slightly the wrong fit. This is the identity lag effect, a peculiar disconnect where your sense of self feels out of sync with the moment, not absent, not gone, but late, like a shadow trying to step into your body just after you've already moved. You might notice it in quiet moments, staring into a mirror, unsure if the reflection feels like you, or during conversations where your words flow effortlessly but feel pre-recorded. You watch yourself perform the role of yourself, while a subtler awareness waits in the wings, still assembling. Psychologists sometimes describe this as a dissociative drift. The machinery of the self is still operating, but the operator is a beat behind. It can happen during stress, exhaustion, even moments of deep change. Your identity, after all, isn't a fixed object. It's a process. And sometimes, that process lags. Cognitive scientists liken it to buffering. Your brain receives sensory input, builds a narrative, references memory, adjusts for social context, and only then does your internal self load into the scene. If something slows that sequence, you're left with a strange effect, life playing in real time, while your inner sense of self trails like a distant echo. But maybe that gap reveals something profound, that who you are isn't constant, but continuously rendered, that your presence isn't automatic, but reassembled, breath by breath, word by word. So when your identity feels 5 seconds late, perhaps it's just making sure it's still you before arriving. You're brushing your teeth, tying your shoes, waiting for the kettle to boil. When it arrives, a thought, uninvited, harsh, inappropriate, entirely out of character, not something you believe, not something you'd say, and yet there it is, as if dropped into your mind by invisible hands. You didn't summon it, you don't want it, but for a moment, it's yours. This is what psychologists call an intrusive thought, a mental trespass with no clear origin, often random, sometimes disturbing, always confusing. You might recoil, wondering, why would I think that? But here's the unsettling truth. The thought doesn't require a why. It isn't yours in the way you imagine thoughts to be. It simply appeared. Across centuries, mystics and philosophers have struggled with this exact sensation. In medieval monasteries, monks feared these sudden intrusions as whispers of the devil. In Tibetan texts, they were seen as karmic winds, echoes from past lives brushing the mind's surface. Today, neuroscience maps them to misfires in pattern recognition, emotional resonance, or unresolved memory. But even science cannot fully tame the strange discomfort they bring. Imagine your mind as a quiet library. Most of the books are familiar, self-written, self-read. But occasionally, a page from another story drifts in, unbound. You don't know who wrote it. You don't know what it means. But for a moment, it lies open in your hands. You don't need to wrestle with it. You don't need to explain it. Thoughts are not contracts. They are not confessions. They are weather, passing, shifting, unclaimed. So as you lie back, listening to your breath, allow the storm to pass overhead. Let each strange thought come and go without anchoring to it. You are not your thoughts. You are the sky in which they flicker. And some clouds are just passing strangers. Imagine walking through a crowded station. Hundreds of faces pass in a blur, indistinct, unnoticed. But then, one makes you pause. Something in the curve of the jaw, the angle of the eyes, a flicker of recognition, though you're certain you've never met. Still, your chest softens. You feel safer, warmer, as if a memory quietly wrapped itself around the present. This is the gravity of familiar faces, when echoes of past affection anchor themselves to strangers. Your brain is not scanning faces like a neutral camera. It's mapping them emotionally, relationally. Every person you've loved, or feared, leaves behind a kind of facial template, a blueprint etched into the folds of recognition. And when you see someone new whose features align with that template, even imperfectly, your brain lights up with recycled emotion. This phenomenon is rooted in a cognitive shortcut called transference. The mind, always seeking efficiency, applies old emotions to new people who resemble figures from your past. In psychoanalysis, this often surfaces in therapy, but in daily life, it plays out in split seconds. A kindness toward someone who mirrors a lost friend, or suspicion of someone whose face recalls an old wound. Evolutionarily, this made sense. Recognizing allies or threats by appearance alone could mean the difference between survival and danger. But today, it's subtler. A gentle gravitational pull, drawing us closer to or repelling us from people we don't truly know. In ancient myth, gods and spirits would disguise themselves as loved ones to deliver messages. Perhaps our minds do something similar, overlaying comfort onto the unknown, reminding us that emotion doesn't wait for logic. It moves first. It feels first. So next time you feel a strange warmth toward a passing face, pause. You're not imagining it. You're remembering it, just through someone else, not the same person, but the same gravity. The pull of a face once known, echoing in one just met. You open your eyes, but you're still partially elsewhere. The room is quiet, familiar, yet something inside you aches with meaning. A story just ended, but you can't recall the plot, or the characters, or even the shape of the setting. Only the emotional fog remains, a sadness that feels specific, but belongs to nothing you can name. This is the echoed residue of a dream, not the images, which are already dissolving, not the dialogue, which never quite made sense, but the emotional temperature, a tone, a heaviness, like finding a stranger's coat draped over your shoulders, warm, ill-fitting, and full of someone else's memories. Sleep researchers often call this affective dream residue, the emotional traces dreams leave behind, even when the dream itself slips away. The brain, in REM sleep, processes emotion more vividly than logic. So while the narrative may vanish on waking, the feelings linger, woven deep into your waking mood. In ancient Mesopotamia, dream priests believed the gods whispered truth through dreams, but the messages were coded in metaphor. You weren't meant to remember the whole vision, only the impression, the moral, the emotional signature. That's what mattered. A dream could disappear entirely, yet still shift the way someone acted for days. And today, it still happens. You carry around a vague sorrow for something that never occurred. You catch yourself grieving for someone who doesn't exist. Or you avoid a place, a person, an idea, because a dream once placed them inside a sadness your conscious mind cannot trace. Imagine yourself waking from a misty landscape, no footprints, no map, just a cold wind through the chest. You try to shrug it off, make coffee, check your messages, but some part of you remains suspended, tethered to an atmosphere that felt real, even if the details did not survive. And that's the strange honesty of dreams. Sometimes, it's not the story we remember, only the feeling that we were briefly someone else. Imagine lying still in your bed, the room dim and undisturbed. You haven't moved, and yet something feels reversed. You sense your legs are where your head should be. The ceiling feels lower than it should be, or the walls seem to lean in the wrong direction. You know rationally that nothing has changed, but your body feels misaligned, as if your brain momentarily rotated your sense of space and forgot to tell you. This sensation is known as spatial disorientation, and while it's more common in pilots and deep-sea divers, brief, harmless versions can occur during sleep, meditation, or prolonged stillness. The brain builds your orientation from many signals: vision, inner ear balance, muscle feedback, and memory of position. But when these signals go quiet, like in darkness or deep rest, strange things can happen. Without reliable anchors, your internal map can drift. Your body might feel upside down, turned sideways, or floating slightly apart from where it actually lies. This is the spatial inversion pulse, a sudden misfire in your brain's ability to locate itself in the world. Astronauts have reported it during early space flights. With no gravity to confirm up, some would wake from sleep convinced they were facing backward, even though they weren't. Monks in silent retreats have described the sensation of sitting inside themselves but facing out through the back of their head. It isn't a hallucination, just a quiet rewiring of direction. You might have felt it in a dark room, drifting between wake and sleep. A pulse of inversion, a soft wrongness, a sideways feeling that passes before you can name it. The body didn't move, but your sense of self did. It's one more reminder that orientation is a construct. Your body is still, but your awareness sometimes wanders in circles. You're alone in a room, but you're not alone in your mind. A decision lingers, small or large, it doesn't matter. And suddenly there are two voices, both familiar. One urges action, the other hesitation. One sounds like confidence, the other like caution. You might think of them as parts of you, the responsible self, the impulsive self. But listen closely. Neither voice quite feels like you. They're more like well-rehearsed characters echoing from somewhere deeper. This is the flickering self-dialogue, that strange mental tug-of-war where internal voices clash and you observe from a distance, unsure which side is yours. You're not the voice that speaks first or the one that rebuts. You're the quiet presence watching both flicker back and forth. In psychology, these inner conversations are called self-talk, a tool for regulation, decision-making, memory. But when the voices oppose each other with equal weight, something disorienting happens. Your identity doesn't feel like the sum of the parts. It feels like something left out of the equation. Some theorists suggest the mind is more like a parliament than a person, a set of conflicting modules evolved for different tasks. One voice is the strategist, one is the storyteller, one is the protector, and none of them, alone or together, equals you. What you feel as you is simply the temporary resolution of their disagreement, until the next debate begins. This flickering can be subtle, a brief internal negotiation over what to say, how to act, what to believe. Or it can deepen into existential fatigue, where you no longer trust either voice, because both feel constructed, prescripted, performed. And in the silence between them, something odd happens. You might feel most like yourself not during the dialogue, but in the pause between replies, as if the real self is not a voice at all, but the stillness beneath them, the space where awareness simply waits without having to take a side. You think of someone you haven't seen in years, and within hours, their name appears on your screen. A song plays on the radio that perfectly mirrors your mood. You glance at the clock, 11:11, again. And for a flicker of a moment, you wonder, was that a sign? This is the quiet gravity of the coincidence narrative bias, your brain's natural pull toward meaning, even when none may exist. Two unrelated events line up, and suddenly they feel stitched together by something unseen. Your mind doesn't like randomness. It prefers stories, so it weaves. For early humans, this pattern-making kept us alive. Rustling grass might mean a predator. Certain stars could guide migrations. The cost of ignoring patterns was high, but in the calm interiors of modern life, that same instinct lingers, seeking order in what might be noise. Jung called these moments synchronicity, not cause and effect, but meaningful coincidence, an internal state mirrored by the outside world. But science sees it differently. With enough time, enough input, strange alignments are inevitable. Billions of thoughts, billions of events. Some will accidentally rhyme. Still, when it happens, it feels personal. A message, a signal. Your story continuing in ways even you didn't expect. A whispered suggestion that maybe, just maybe, there's a plot beneath the chaos. Imagine your life as a vast novel, but written backward. Each chapter retroactively justified by what came before. The brain, ever the narrator, fills in gaps, connects dots, spins threads from thin air. Not to deceive you, but to comfort you. Because meaning is warmer than chance. So tonight, as thoughts drift in and out like waves, let them rise without needing to explain them. Not every moment is a message. Not every echo is a sign. And still, the story will go on, quietly written by a mind that craves connection, even in the dark. Picture a childhood memory. You're standing beneath a gray sky, watching a kite snag on a power line. You remember the feeling, cold fingers, a parent's voice in the background, the sound of nylon snapping in the wind. It feels entirely yours. But years later, in conversation, a friend tells you the exact same story as their own, and something inside you shifts. That memory, so vivid, so personal, wasn't entirely yours. It was borrowed, grafted. This is the memory graft phenomenon, when your mind stitches foreign memories into your own timeline so seamlessly that they feel native, organic, lived. It doesn't take deception or trauma, just time, storytelling, and emotional resonance. A tale told enough times in your presence can slide into your memory's texture, gently replacing the edges of your own recollection. The brain, after all, is not an archive. It is a storyteller. Every time you remember something, you don't retrieve the original, you recreate it. Each recall is a soft overwrite, a chance for facts to bend, for details to drift. And when someone else's vivid story nestles into that moment of reconstruction, it can fuse so quietly that you don't notice the seam. Studies show this happens more often than we think. In group settings, people begin to share memories of events they never witnessed. Photoshopped images can plant false recollections. Even dreams told aloud can later be remembered as actual events. The line between experienced and imagined isn't a wall, it's a veil. In ancient oral cultures, this was part of communal identity. Shared memory was more important than individual accuracy. But in modern life, we treat memory as a ledger, precise, personal. When in truth, it's more like a tapestry, patched, rewoven, sometimes with threads that are not entirely ours. So when you find yourself recalling a moment that feels oddly distant, oddly specific, pause. Part of it might be real, and part might be a gift, left quietly in the folds of your mind by someone else's voice, long ago. There are moments that don't ask to be remembered, yet somehow glow with a quiet significance even as they unfold. A slow sunset through a train window, laughter echoing faintly in the next room. The last few minutes of a conversation you didn't know would matter. You're still inside the moment, but already feeling it slip away. This is reverse nostalgia, the strange, tender awareness that you are living something you will one day miss. It's not about the past, but about a present already soaked in future longing. Your mind, halfway between presence and prediction, records the moment not with clarity, but with emotion. A kind of mental time-lapse begins, compressing now into then, before now is even gone. Philosophers have described this as temporal vertigo, the sensation that time is flowing in two directions at once. You live the moment and mourn its passing simultaneously. A child clutches a toy while already sensing it won't be loved forever. An old friend smiles, and part of you knows this could be the last time. Even in joy, there's a thread of farewell. In 19th century romantic poetry, this was called longing in the now, a heightened awareness of impermanence. The cherry blossom not just admired for its beauty, but for the knowledge that it will fall. Cultures like the Japanese developed entire aesthetics, like mono no aware, around this bittersweet perception, the beauty of a thing enhanced by its fleetingness. Imagine yourself sitting quietly, watching light filter across a wall. Nothing remarkable happens, yet something in you is already assigning it meaning, not because it's dramatic, but because it's passing, and that's enough. Reverse nostalgia is a gentle sorrow, not for what's gone, but for what is and won't be for long. You feel the memory forming in real time, even as you still sit inside it. Imagine waking up with the faint sting of strain in your throat. You haven't spoken all night, or so you thought. There were no phone calls, no whispered conversations, just the quiet drift of dreams. And yet, your voice feels used, as if it wandered off without you, spoke aloud in another room of your mind, and returned only as an ache. This subtle, strange experience is what some call sleeper's voice displacement, when the line between dream speech and real speech quietly dissolves. In REM sleep, the mind becomes vivid. Scenarios unfold with clarity. And sometimes, in those dreams, you speak, not just internally, but physically. A murmur, a full sentence, a shout you don't remember making. Researchers have recorded this in sleep labs. Talkers, in their dreams producing barely audible words, often fragmented, but unmistakably spoken. In most cases, the person remembers the dream. Rarely do they recall the act of speaking. The voice, it seems, took a different path. Sleep talking, somniloquy, is usually harmless, but what fascinates researchers is the dissociation. The mind creates the speech, the body performs it, and yet the waking self has no record of the event. The dream world borrows your voice and leaves behind only the echo. You may have experienced it yourself, the dream where you scream but wake to silence, or the whispered goodbye in a dream that leaves your chest heavy and your throat raw. Some believe this is where the subconscious tries to surface, a message pressing upward from deep layers of thought, reaching out through sound. In the stillness of night, when language loses its anchor, the self divides. One part dreams, one part speaks. Neither remembers fully what the other said. And in the morning, the body quietly carries the trace of a conversation you never knew you had. Repeat a word, any word, over and over in your mind. Window, time, self. At first, the meaning clings, but after a dozen repetitions, something strange happens. The sound pulls free from its definition. The syllables wobble, hollow out, become strange. Window no longer opens onto anything. It's just noise, shaped breath, vibration. It becomes unfamiliar, then absurd, and sometimes, if you stay with it, almost holy. This is the meaning drift effect, a quiet cognitive distortion where language loops on itself and loses its grip. Psychologists call it semantic satiation, but that label misses its emotional texture, because what happens isn't just linguistic fatigue, it's a small unraveling of reality. Language is the net we cast over the world to hold it in place. But when the net frays, we see the water beneath. In those moments, we realize meaning isn't fixed. It's something we project, reinforce, repeat until it feels real. The word love, the word truth, the word me, all stable until they aren't. Children often experience this without knowing it. They say a word too many times and giggle, unsure why it suddenly sounds like gibberish. But adults encounter it too, in chants, in prayers, in sleepless nights where a phrase loops endlessly in the mind. When a word slips loose from meaning, it can feel disturbing or transcendent. Sometimes both. In ancient rituals, repetition was a tool not to deaden meaning, but to dissolve it, so something deeper could emerge. A silence, a rhythm, a feeling of touching something beneath language. The sacred doesn't always arrive through new words. Sometimes it reveals itself in the breakdown of the old ones. So if you find yourself repeating something until it sounds strange, don't pull away too quickly. Let it drift. Let it become alien. And in that unfamiliar echo, you might glimpse what meaning looks like before we decide what it should be. You reach for a glass. Your fingers close around it, but the feeling arrives just a moment too late. Not enough to alarm you, just enough to notice. A faint dissonance, like watching your reflection move out of sync. The motion happens, but your awareness lags behind. This is the mind-body desync slip, a subtle fracture in the illusion that you are one seamless, continuous being. In reality, your brain processes action and sensation along staggered timelines. Movement is initiated before you're fully conscious of deciding it. Sensation is felt after the fact, backdated to seem immediate. Neuroscientists have mapped this lag, roughly 300 milliseconds between intention and conscious awareness, sometimes longer for complex actions. The brain edits time, smoothing over the delay like an invisible cut in a film. You rarely notice it, but sometimes, when tired or startled, the illusion wobbles. You feel like a puppet pulling its own strings, but with gloves on. Ancient philosophers describe the body as a vessel, the mind as its pilot. But what happens when the pilot and the ship aren't quite in sync? In certain dream states, or moments of fever, people report strange distortions, limbs that feel too large, too small, or somehow not theirs. This isn't madness. It's timing. A misalignment in the choreography of experience. Imagine a conductor raising their baton a breath too late. The orchestra still plays, but something feels off, just enough to unsettle the air. And yet, even in this delay, there is a kind of grace. Your body leads. Your mind follows. They learn to dance despite the mismatch, not perfectly, but reliably enough. So as you sink into sleep, let the rhythms fall out of step. Let your limbs feel distant, dreamy, untethered. It's okay to lose the illusion of perfect harmony. You were always stitched together by delay, and somehow it still holds. Imagine sitting with friends as they recount a night from years ago, a road trip, a storm, a broken radio, laughter echoing in the dark. And as they speak, you feel it stir in you. You remember the flicker of the dashboard lights, the weight of the seatbelt, the way the rain hit the windshield. But then someone says gently, "You weren't there." And after the silence, you check. And they're right. But the memory still clings, not imagined, not dreamed, just unlived. This is the unlived memory stitch, a quiet glitch where your mind grafts a vivid memory into your past, despite clear proof you never experienced it. It doesn't feel vague or false. It feels emotionally real, as if the moment snuck into your history through some back door, wrapped not in fact, but in feeling. Psychologists call this a false memory, but the term feels too clinical. What you're experiencing isn't a deliberate fabrication. It's the result of suggestion, repetition, and emotional alignment. Perhaps you've heard the story so many times that your brain filled in the blanks, adding color, scent, sound. Or maybe you wanted to belong to that moment so much that your mind obliged, offering you a memory stitched from longing. Studies on memory implantation show how fragile our timelines really are. Participants asked to recall fake events, like being lost in a mall, often invent rich details, not because they're lying, but because the brain seeks coherence. It prefers a complete story, even if it has to build one. In some cultures, memory is collective. Families and tribes carry shared pasts, even if not all were present. Maybe your mind follows that older path, valuing emotional truth over chronological precision. So, when you hold an unlived memory, don't rush to erase it. Let it rest. Because sometimes, the soul remembers things the body never touched. And even in absence, the moment left something behind. You catch yourself thinking about something you need to do, an upcoming meeting, a difficult conversation, a journey not yet taken. And for a brief second, your brain tells you it already happened. A flicker of relief or regret flashes through your body. You pause, confused. Was it yesterday? Last week? No, it hasn't happened yet. But it feels like it has. This is the tense collapse trap, a subtle trick of the mind where time's grammar fails and your thoughts misfile the future as memory. The more vividly you imagine an event, its sounds, its sequence, your actions, the more easily your brain stores it like it's something you've already lived, not as imagination, but as recall. Cognitive scientists suggest this results from how the brain handles episodic simulation. The same neural circuits used to remember the past are also used to imagine the future. The line between rehearsal and remembrance is thin and easily crossed. To your neurons, the difference between "I will go" and "I went" becomes blurry under stress, repetition, or emotional weight. In ancient storytelling traditions, seers and prophets didn't predict the future, they remembered it. Their visions were described in past tense. The future was not an unfolding, but a return to something already written. Linear time, for them, was a fragile illusion. You might feel it when replaying the mental script of an anticipated event so many times that you forget you haven't yet delivered the lines, or when dreaming of a life change, moving, leaving, ending something, and waking up with the sense that the choice was already made. Imagine yourself standing in a room you haven't entered yet, already nostalgic for the moment you'll walk away. Memory and expectation collapse into a single point, like two mirrors facing each other, reflecting the same event from opposite directions. And so, time stutters. You remember what hasn't happened, because your mind, in a way, has already lived it. Imagine sitting still, trying to focus, on a book, a task, a moment. But your mind feels cloudy, like trying to see through misted glass. You can't quite name what's wrong, just a vague hum of distraction. Then slowly, you begin to notice it. Your brain is crowded, not loudly, not clearly, but beneath the surface, thought fragments drift and loop like quiet code. Open tabs you didn't know were running. This is the background thought haze, a subtle cognitive noise caused by unattended mental processes. Planning, worrying, replaying, scripting conversations that never happened. You're not thinking them actively, yet they weigh down your clarity, like fog that never fully lifts. Cognitive science suggests the conscious mind handles just a sliver of our total processing. Beneath awareness, your brain rehearses possibilities, monitors long-term goals, simulates emotional outcomes. These silent tasks don't shout, they whisper, but they pull energy, attention, and presence. In ancient traditions, this was described as the mind's wind, invisible yet restless. Monks learning deep focus would spend years identifying and calming these currents, not by force but by noticing. Naming the thoughts made them vanish. Ignoring them made them louder. You may have felt this during a slow afternoon or while lying in bed, that sensation of being pulled inward by 1,000 unfinished ideas. Nothing specific, just a haze, a knowing that your mind is somewhere else, everywhere else. Some of these thoughts never form full sentences. They're impressions, emotional shadows, flickers of memory or imagined futures that never get spoken aloud, yet they hum in the background, shaping your mood, your energy, your silence. And when the mind quiets, truly quiets, it's not just peaceful, it's lighter, clearer, unburdened. Until then, we drift through fog woven by ourselves. You reach for a doorknob, a cup, a light switch, and for the briefest moment, you feel it before contact is made. A faint pressure, a whisper of temperature, a ghost of texture. Your fingers close in, and by the time they arrive, the moment feels oddly familiar. Not like déjà vu in thought, but déjà vu in touch, as if sensation arrived early, as if time flickered. This is the sensory echo delay, a quiet anomaly in perception where the brain misaligns experience, letting you feel the future a fraction too soon. It's subtle and easy to dismiss, but when it happens, it leaves a strange residue, as though your body remembered something that hadn't yet occurred. Neuroscience offers one explanation: that sensory information doesn't always arrive in perfect sync. Your brain predicts incoming input using past experience, then fills in the blanks before the signal fully lands. It's not always accurate, but it's fast. So fast, in fact, that the guess sometimes arrives before the truth. This delay isn't just in touch. A similar effect can happen with sound, the moment you think you've heard a word before it's spoken. Or light, the sense that your eyes have already adjusted before the room changes. These are not hallucinations. They're echoes, reverberating not from the past, but from just ahead of the present. In ancient mysticism, sensations like these were interpreted as bleed-throughs from alternate timelines or overlapping dimensions. The idea that perception sometimes slips, and you glimpse the event just before the moment you're meant to. But even without metaphysics, the mystery remains. If your brain is predicting reality, and you're feeling its predictions before reality confirms them, then what exactly is now? And how many of your present moments are actually borrowed from just ahead? Maybe the future doesn't knock first. Maybe it brushes past your skin, silently, hoping you won't notice. You're walking through a quiet room. Nothing is wrong. No one's watching. And yet, something clenches in your chest. A vague discomfort. The sense that you've forgotten something important, or worse, done something you shouldn't have. But when you search for the reason, there's nothing there. Just the faint, static hum of unease. This is the ambient guilt illusion. A subtle, shapeless feeling of wrongdoing without a cause. It's not tethered to a specific memory or mistake. It simply is, like background noise in your emotional weather. A heaviness in the air that your mind interprets as punishment, even in the absence of a crime. Some theories link this feeling to early experiences, quiet rules we absorbed without question. Don't be too loud. Don't ask too much. Don't take up space. Over time, these invisible boundaries sink beneath the surface, shaping our sense of self. So when we rest or slow down, or even feel joy, something tugs at us, whispering that it might not be allowed. In medieval cloisters, monks describe this as acedia, a spiritual fog, a creeping guilt without origin, not tied to sin, but to stillness, to being alone with one's own mind. Even now, in our brightly lit modern lives, that fog still finds us, especially in quiet moments. It's easier to keep moving than to sit with a feeling that says you've done something, but won't say what. But guilt, like pain, is a signal, not a sentence. And sometimes, the signal is a false alarm. The system misfires. It floods the body with the echo of wrongness, even when everything is right. So as you lie here, let the feeling drift in without resistance. Don't argue with it. Don't try to name it. Just notice it and let it pass, like weather. The air is not judging you. It never was. Imagine standing in front of a mirror late at night. The house is still. The lights are low. You catch your reflection, not as something to fix or examine, but as something other. You smile, and your reflection smiles back, a fraction too gently. It feels less like your own expression, and more like someone else's, someone offering comfort from behind the glass. That subtle warmth, that small flicker of connection, is the reverse mirror affection. We're taught to see the mirror as neutral, a silent echo. But in quiet moments, the illusion wavers. The image stares back not just with symmetry, but with suggestion. Because the person in the mirror isn't quite you. It's reversed, flipped, a version of your face that no one else sees. You know them intimately, and yet, they've never spoken, never blinked first, never lived outside your gaze. Familiar, yet not entirely trusted. Psychologists have long explored this tension. The strange face illusion suggests that prolonged mirror gazing in dim light can lead to eerie distortions. But even without hallucination, there's something unsettlingly tender about catching your own gaze and feeling like you're being seen, not by yourself, but by a twin who knows your sadness, your effort, your fatigue, and doesn't judge. The mirror becomes a boundary, not of glass, but of perception. On one side, the self you inhabit. On the other, the self you observe. And between them, a flickering affection, a quiet reassurance from someone who cannot speak, yet always responds. The version of you that doesn't carry your thoughts, only your posture, your fatigue, your quiet resilience. In moments of loneliness, the mirror self becomes a companion, not to replace others, but to reflect something softer than critique, presence. So next time you catch yourself gazing at your own eyes and feel comfort instead of critique, pause. You may not be imagining it. You may just be receiving kindness from a version of you that exists only in reflection. You wake up. The room looks familiar, but something's off. The shadows move too smoothly. Your phone won't unlock. A quiet dread settles in your stomach. Then, sudden relief. It was a dream. You've woken up. or so you think. Until it happens again and again, each time peeling back a layer only to find another dream curled underneath. This is the dream layer shuffle, a looping descent through nested realities where each awakening is only partial and certainty becomes thinner with every return. Lucid dreamers know this well. So do those in deep REM rebound or recovering from stress-induced sleep cycles. The brain's grip on boundaries weakens, and the architecture of reality starts to blur. Sleep researchers call this a false awakening loop. Your brain simulates the act of waking up so convincingly that you believe it, even reproducing your room, your posture, your daily habits, but you remain trapped inside a copy. Each layer mimics consciousness slightly better than the last, making it harder to tell when you've truly emerged. In Tibetan dream yoga, these nested dreams were maps. Practitioners trained to stay aware across layers, treating each awakening as another illusion to pass through, because to them, ordinary life was simply the last, densest dream. Not more real, just harder to wake from. You may have felt it before, that unease upon waking, where the air feels too still or your reflection seems delayed. You touch objects just to feel their weight, or you speak aloud just to hear your voice. You're not testing the world exactly, you're checking for seams, because some part of you isn't sure this is the final layer. Imagine yourself spiraling through versions of morning, coffee cups that rearrange, clocks with wrong times, people with unreadable faces. You keep surfacing, but it never quite feels done. And when you finally wake for real, you still wonder, what if this is just the last dream that knows how to behave? You're walking alone, or staring at the ceiling, or just brushing your teeth. A thought surfaces in your mind, ordinary at first, but something feels off. The tone is too sharp, or too formal, or too cruel. It's in your voice, but not quite your voice, like an echo from someone else using your vocal cords inside your head. You pause, wondering, why did I think that? But maybe you didn't. Not fully. This is the inner monologue doppelganger, a peculiar moment where your thoughts speak in a way that doesn't match who you believe you are. Not a hallucination, not possession, just a misalignment between the voice you know and the voice that sometimes borrows you. It might be subtle, a sentence you'd never phrase that way, a judgment that arrives too fast, too harsh, a phrase too poetic, too bitter, too detached. You hear it, feel the shape of it, and something deep inside recoils, not because it's foreign, but because it's almost familiar. Some psychologists see this as a product of internalized voices, fragments of parents, teachers, strangers absorbed over years and now stitched into your inner script. Others suggest it's a split in self-awareness, where your brain generates commentary faster than your identity can approve it. Writers sometimes describe the feeling when a character starts speaking on their own. Philosophers have long asked who exactly is doing the thinking when you hear a thought. And in moments of mental fatigue or emotional intensity, that voice can tilt further from center, showing a version of you that's close, but misaligned. But maybe there's no single voice that's yours. Maybe your mind is a house with many rooms, and most days, you only sit in one. Occasionally, a door creaks open, and another version of you speaks. Not a stranger, not a ghost, just a doppelganger passing through, quietly reminding you that the self you know is never the only one inside. Imagine walking through your day with a quiet voice in your mind, not intrusive, not loud, but ever present. It comments on what you're doing. It phrases your actions in story form. She reached for the mug. He lingered at the doorway. Sometimes it sounds like you. Other times, it doesn't. And slowly, a strange question begins to surface. If no one is listening, why are you narrating at all? This is the narrative observer syndrome, a subtle and curious phenomenon where your thoughts take on the tone of a third-person account. It isn't just internal monologue. It's storytelling, structured, reflective, as if some unseen presence needs context for your every move. Psychologists suggest this inner narrator might stem from early social development. As children, we're taught to explain ourselves to parents, to teachers, to peers. Over time, we internalize an audience, a soft echo of accountability. But that audience doesn't always fade. Sometimes it becomes the narrator, and sometimes we forget it isn't real. Writers know this feeling well, the mental framing of scenes, the rewording of memories as if they belong to a character. But even non-writers report it. During lonely walks, after emotional arguments, in moments of reflection. As if documenting the experience gives it meaning, or at least coherence. In ancient philosophies, this was sometimes seen as witness consciousness, a deeper self that observes without attachment. But the modern version can feel more performative, as though you're shaping your own perception in anticipation of someone else's. And perhaps that's the most haunting part, when the narrator feels slightly separate from you, watching, judging, framing your life like a novel with no reader. You live your life, but someone inside you is writing it down. So the question lingers, who exactly is the story for? You're going about your day, folding laundry, standing in line, staring out the window, and suddenly a quiet heaviness settles over you. Not sharp or loud, just there, like a distant fog curling around your ribs. You're not thinking of anything sad, nothing happened, and yet you feel it, a sorrow without source. This is the phantom emotion overlay, a strange phenomenon where feelings seem to appear without origin, not tied to a memory, not sparked by a thought, just emotion, hovering, drifting in like perfume from a room you've never entered. You might try to explain it. Maybe I'm tired, maybe it's the weather, but the explanations don't quite land. The feeling remains, quiet, weightless, heavy. Some believe these emotions come from the unconscious, a backlog of unprocessed feelings that surface without warning. Others think they're borrowed, picked up from a face on the train, a tone in a stranger's voice, a flicker in someone's eyes that said, "I'm not okay," even if no words followed. We absorb more than we realize. We carry echoes. In folklore, this sensation was often described as being ridden by ghosts, not literal spirits, but the unseen burdens of others. A grief that doesn't belong to you but rests on you anyway. A sadness with no name, no beginning, no one to return it to. But maybe not all feelings need a reason. Maybe some just pass through, like wind through tall grass, bending you gently, reminding you that you're porous, that even in stillness, you are part of a larger current. So if you feel that sorrow tonight, the kind that arrives unannounced, don't chase it away. Let it sit. Let it fade. Not everything that visits your chest was born in your heart, and not everything that weighs on you needs to be yours forever. Imagine watching a clock. The second hand ticks forward, and yet something's wrong. It feels slow, as if the air has thickened. You check again. Only 10 seconds have passed, or maybe the opposite. You glance up from your work and somehow an entire hour has vanished, not felt, not noticed, just gone. Time, it seems, is not behaving. This is the anti-time compression field, where your perception of time's passage warps, stretches, or collapses entirely. We often speak of time as fixed, 60 seconds in a minute, always the same. But inside the brain, time is elastic. It bends to attention, emotion, novelty. A new experience, a walk in an unfamiliar city, can feel rich and long. But routine days, repeated without variation, blur into something barely measurable. The clock may stay steady, but your perception wobbles. Neuroscientists trace this to how your brain encodes experience. When you're hyper-aware, anxious, excited, alert, your brain takes in more detail, more sensory data. That increased mental activity tricks you into thinking more time has passed. Meanwhile, in states of flow or deep focus, time contracts. Your attention narrows, your sense of self dims, and the clock accelerates without permission. In some cultures, time is not linear, but circular. In others, it is event-based rather than hour-bound. And perhaps that's closer to how we feel time: subjective, inconsistent, alive. The anti-time compression field isn't a place, but a state of being. When the internal rhythm of your mind and the external ticking of the world fall out of sync. You've felt it before, during a sleepless night, when every minute stretches like an hour, or during a good conversation, when you swear it's only been moments, but the sun has shifted across the sky. So if the minutes feel warped, don't worry. You're not broken. You're just inside one of those quiet pockets where time stops obeying. And in that space, the past loosens, the future waits, and the present becomes strangely wide. You remember the way the light hit the floor, or the exact pattern on a shirt. A single sentence someone said, ordinary but echoing. That one detail holds perfect clarity, like a sharp corner of a photo left untouched, while the rest has faded or crumpled with time. Everything else? Blurred, muffled, maybe even wrong. This is the memory foldback effect, when the mind anchors itself so tightly to one detail that it distorts or erases the rest. Memory, despite its reputation, is not a recording device. It's a living reconstruction, constantly revised. And sometimes, when a fragment lodges too deeply, it folds the rest of the moment inward, warping time, context, and emotion around it. Psychologists call this emotional salience. The stronger the feeling attached to a detail, the more dominant it becomes. The way someone looked at you when they said goodbye, the sound of rain during a quiet panic, that one offhand comment you can't forget. These fragments become gravity wells, pulling all surrounding memory into their orbit, sometimes reshaping it entirely. In witness reports, this is why stories diverge. 10 people see the same event, but one remembers only a scream, another the color of the shoes. Over time, the sharper the focal point, the more peripheral reality collapses. The brain prioritizes meaning, not truth; impact, not accuracy. Ancient cultures understood memory as storytelling. In Greek myth, Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory, was also the mother of the muses. What you remember was never just fact. It was shaped by what needed to be felt. Imagine yourself holding a photograph that's been folded over and over at the same spot. Eventually, the crease dominates, the paper wears thin, and though the image is still there, your eyes are drawn only to the fold. And so it is with memory. We don't remember moments. We remember the parts that refuse to let go. You step into a hallway, a forest path, a quiet street in a city you've never known. And yet, you know the turn ahead leads to a fountain. You know which door creaks, which tile is chipped. The smell is already remembered, the breeze familiar before it brushes your skin. You pause, not in fear, but in eerie recognition. Not déjà vu, something deeper, something impossibly precise. This is the hyper-real familiarity glitch. A moment when your mind behaves as if it's returning, not arriving. As if memory has been preloaded into a place you've never touched. And the strangest part? You're not wrong. You do know what's around the corner. Some say it's the brain misfiring, a scrambled blend of imagination, memory, and expectation. The mind, in its effort to create a coherent narrative, overreaches. It fills in the unknown with fabricated recall so vivid it feels ancient. But others wonder if it's more than invention, that perhaps the boundary between perception and memory isn't as strict as we think. Certain dream theorists suggest these places have appeared before, not in waking life, but in dreams long forgotten, that your body doesn't remember, but your intuition does, that the sense of familiarity isn't false, just relocated. Others, more metaphysical, speak of simulation residue, glitches in procedural reality, places rendered before your consciousness reaches them. And in rare moments, your mind notices the pre-rendering. You realize you've seen the blueprint of the world before walking through it. Whatever the cause, the effect is haunting. A sense of returning to something never lived. A feeling that place, time, and memory aren't locked in order, but swirling, folding, occasionally syncing up in perfect, impossible recognition. So if you turn the corner and find exactly what you expected, don't be alarmed. It may be the first time your body's been there, but not the first time you have. Imagine sitting quietly when an unexpected thought drifts in, sharp, dark, unwelcome. It's not something you'd act on, not even something you believe, but there it is. A flash of aggression, a strange image, a question you wish you hadn't formed, and before you can dismiss it, you're already reacting. Why did I think that? What does it say about me? The thought is gone, but now you're tangled in its echo. This is the thought loop noose, a self-tightening spiral where one intrusive thought triggers judgment, which triggers doubt, which deepens the original disturbance. Each loop constricts awareness, not with volume, but with repetition. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels stuck. Psychologists refer to these as ego-dystonic thoughts, ideas that conflict with your values and sense of self. They often appear without warning, pulled from the depths of subconscious fear, anxiety, or randomness. Most people experience them. Few speak of them. Because the second trap is shame. You don't just wonder why you thought it, you wonder what kind of person would think it. That meta-thought, the thought about the thought, is what tightens the noose. A loop begins, and the more you try to silence it, the louder its pattern becomes. In cognitive therapy, patients are taught to notice the thought without merging with it. A cloud passing overhead, they say. Let it drift. But in the middle of a spiral, that feels impossible. The thought isn't weather, it's identity, or so it seems. And yet, the truth is gentler. Thoughts are not orders. They are not character. They are flickers, tests, misfires. The brain is a pattern machine, not a moral compass. It generates content. You choose what to hold. But the loop forgets that. The loop insists you look closer, again and again, until the shape of the original thought is lost, and all that remains is the tension of having had it. You're lying in bed, calm and still. And suddenly, a scene flickers behind your eyes. A phone call you haven't received. A goodbye you haven't said. A moment, painful, final, that hasn't happened and may never happen. And yet your chest tightens. Your eyes sting. Your body grieves as if the loss is real. This is the future pain pre-play. Your mind rehearsing sorrow before it arrives. An emotional simulation so vivid that it bypasses logic and lands straight in your nervous system. It's not just imagination. It's embodiment. The brain doesn't always distinguish between what's real and what's vividly anticipated, so it floods you with the ache of something that hasn't happened and may never come to pass. Parents feel it when they imagine their children leaving home. Lovers feel it when they picture the silence after an argument that hasn't yet occurred. Even a passing thought, what if I lost them, can unspool into a full internal eulogy. Your body mourns the future as if grieving might protect you. Evolution may have shaped this reflex as preparation. If you can pre-feel the pain, maybe it won't hurt as much when it arrives. But in reality, the opposite often happens. You suffer twice, once now, in your mind, and again later, if the event ever truly comes. Some mystics called this borrowed sorrow. Others saw it as a form of spiritual rehearsal, proof of deep love, or fragile attachment. But in all cases, it's a kind of time-traveling grief, an echo of something not yet spoken, already pressing its weight on your ribs. Tonight, if that sorrow visits you, name it gently. Don't resist it, but don't invite it to stay. You are not required to live your losses before they unfold. You are here, still whole, still holding what matters. The future is unwritten. Let the page rest blank a little longer. Imagine lying in bed, perfectly still, when a thought slips in. I'm breathing. And suddenly, the rhythm that carried you effortlessly all day is no longer automatic. Each inhale now feels deliberate. Each exhale a conscious effort. What was once background becomes foreground. You're driving a vehicle you were never meant to steer. This is the breath autopilot paradox, when awareness hijacks one of the body's oldest, most silent systems. Breathing is unique. Unlike your heartbeat or digestion, it straddles two realms, voluntary and involuntary. You can control it when needed, but you don't have to. It's designed to hum quietly in the background while your attention is elsewhere. But the moment you shine a light on it, it stutters, like a dancer who loses rhythm when watched too closely. This paradox reveals a strange truth. The body works best when you leave it alone. Your diaphragm doesn't need permission. Your lungs do not ask for supervision. But consciousness, curious and meddlesome, can't help interfering. And once involved, it's hard to retreat. You may find yourself counting breaths, adjusting pace, unsure of what normal even was. Ancient meditative traditions knew this. Breath became the anchor of attention because it walks that line. It's always there, always changing, always controllable, until it isn't. Practitioners would observe it not to control, but to notice, to sit beside the breath without sitting on top of it. And yet, the paradox remains. The more you try to let go, the harder it becomes. In that tension lives a quiet unease, a reminder that awareness, while powerful, can sometimes be too loud for its own good. But here's the comfort. Eventually, the mind lets go. The breath reclaims itself. The rhythm resumes. You forget to notice. And in that forgetting, peace returns. Not because you fixed the breath, but because you stopped trying. So, if you're here now, watching your own inhale, exhale, inhale, be patient. The body remembers the dance. It's only waiting for you to step back into silence. You walk alone, but someone is speaking to you, in your mind. You respond, not out loud, but internally, with full presence. You anticipate their reaction, prepare your reply. The rhythm flows naturally. You play both parts, and later, you find yourself remembering the exchange, as if it had really occurred. This is the mind's rehearsal hall, a quiet, invisible chamber where imagined conversations unfold with such detail and emotional charge that they begin to blur with lived memory. It's not delusion. It's simulation. A normal function of a brain evolved to predict, to prepare, to protect. Psychologists refer to this as internal dialogue simulation, a mental rehearsal of social interaction that engages many of the same neural pathways as actual experience. The brain doesn't always tag these rehearsals as fictional, especially when they're repeated, emotionally vivid, or reinforced by stress. You've likely had this happen. A confrontation never voiced, an apology never delivered, a future meeting played out so many times in your head that it lingers like history. You can recall how it felt, how you stood, the exact tone you used. But when you try to place it in time, it's not there, because it never happened, except inside you. In ancient philosophies, this internal theater was seen as sacred. The Stoics believed in premeditatio malorum, rehearsing potential difficulties as a form of mental armor. In Buddhist thought, thoughts were treated like guests passing through a house, real in sensation, but not permanent, not personal, not always true. Imagine yourself sitting in an empty room, yet hearing the echo of imagined voices, some comforting, some challenging. You pace, you pause, you refine your script. The chairs stay empty, but the emotions are real, the outcomes linger. And later, when the real conversation arrives, you might forget which version truly occurred, because in your mind, you've already lived it 100 times. It comes without warning. You're washing dishes, half asleep on a train, or staring at the ceiling in a quiet room, and something opens. For a breathless instant, it all makes sense. Everything. Time, self, the shape of your life, the meaning behind it all. A crystalline understanding floods in, too vast to name. You feel like a child remembering a forgotten language. The universe hums with clarity, and then, gone. This is the glimpse then vanish phenomenon, a brief, overwhelming knowing that collapses before it can be written down, shared, or even fully felt, like watching the answer to everything scroll past on a screen, then waking to find it wiped clean. You're left with a stunned aftertaste. The knowledge was real, but you have no proof it was ever there. Some call it a noetic flash, insight beyond language. Mystics liken it to touching the edge of the divine, a transmission from something greater that the human mind simply can't hold. Others frame it neurologically. The brain, in rare moments, syncs disparate networks so efficiently that a brief illusion of total understanding occurs. But whether mystical or mundane, the result is the same: total, shattering clarity, followed by silence. The strange thing is how complete it feels in the moment. Not like a half-formed idea or a passing thought, but a full download, as if your consciousness momentarily expanded wide enough to hold the universe, and then shrank back, dropping everything it couldn't carry. Some spend years chasing the sensation again, through meditation, psychedelics, dreams. But often it arrives only when you stop trying, when the mind is soft, the defenses down, the thinking quiet. So if it ever happens again, if something fills you with a knowing so deep it feels eternal, don't panic when it fades. Don't mourn the loss. Just rest in the echo. Because maybe what matters isn't that you lost it, but that for one impossible moment you knew. Imagine pouring a glass of water, tying your shoes, or watching a stranger across a room. In all these moments, there's something constant. You, a presence behind the action. A quiet continuity that links every gesture, every thought, every decision. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. But it's there, like a watermark on a page. Faint, embedded, undeniable. And yet, try to define it. Say what you are beyond your name, your role, your memories. Try to describe the thing that remains when all labels are stripped away. The more words you use, the further it slips from view. Like trying to cup water in your hands, the self seeps through. This is the identity watermark, the strange, persistent feeling of selfhood that resists clear definition. It's not an illusion. And yet, it's not solid either. You sense it in motion, in reflection, in choice. But the moment you try to trap it in a sentence, it scatters into fragments of biography, personality traits, job titles, preferences, none of which are you, yet all of which wear your shape. Philosophers have long wrestled with this. Descartes declared the self to be thought itself. I think, therefore I am. The Buddhists, in contrast, argued the opposite, that the self is an illusion, a bundle of processes mistaken for a person. Neuroscience adds yet another voice, suggesting the self is constructed moment by moment, a kind of mental interface stitching together memories, sensations, and predictions. Still, you feel it. You feel it in the pause before speaking, in the ache of nostalgia, in the resistance to change, that thread of I running quietly through your days. But try to grasp it directly, and it fades, leaving only the outline of something deeply known, but never fully seen. And maybe that's what makes it real. Say a word, any word, apple. You know what it means. Round, crisp, red. Say it again. Apple. Again. Apple. 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 Keep going just a few more times. And suddenly, something strange happens. The word starts to unravel. It detaches from what it once described. It starts to feel foreign, hollow, as if the sound itself is absurd. This is the semantic stretch warp, a quiet glitch in your brain's meaning-making system. When repetition strips a word of its familiarity, revealing that what felt solid was really just a thin thread connecting sound to concept. Stretch the thread too far, and it snaps. It's called semantic satiation, a phenomenon where language becomes unmoored through repetition. It's not a failure of memory or a lapse in focus. It's your neural circuits tiring of the association. The same way a scent fades if you smell it too long, or a color dulls when you stare too hard. The mind retreats from the familiar when it's pressed too tightly. Poets sometimes chased this state on purpose, repeating syllables until they crumbled into rhythm, tone, vibration. Zen monks would meditate on single mantras until they dissolved into pure sound. In both cases, language became not a vessel for meaning, but something else entirely. a door to silence, to space, to the awareness behind thought. It makes you wonder, if a word can fall apart in your mouth after 10 repetitions, how stable is any meaning we hold? How much of our reality is simply habit, unquestioned labels passed from neuron to neuron, keeping the illusion intact? Tonight, if your thoughts start to loop, let them. Repeat a word until it fades. Let the syllables blur. Watch meaning collapse, not in fear, but in quiet curiosity. Behind the noise of names and labels, there's stillness, there's presence, and that never needs to be defined. Imagine receiving bad news. You nod, you speak calmly, you make tea, you go to work. Everything seems normal, almost distant. And then, days later, when folding laundry or hearing a song, you cry. Not softly, but fully, as if the emotion had been hiding in the walls of time, waiting for its moment. This is the emotional time lag, when your feelings arrive not with the moment, but after it, untethered from any clock. Emotions are often assumed to be immediate, reactive, like pain or pleasure. But the truth is, they operate on their own schedule. The body might register a loss long before the heart accepts it. The mind might process an event long before the soul decides it's safe to feel. Psychologists call this delayed affective response. After trauma, or even subtle emotional disruption, the brain can prioritize functionality. It builds a temporary wall, allowing you to navigate logistics, conversations, survival. Emotion is postponed, not denied, just filed in a quiet drawer to be opened when the world feels still enough to hear the creak of its hinges. Grief, in particular, travels this way. It slips through unnoticed cracks, the chair that's empty, the phone that doesn't ring, and suddenly, what seemed like strength is revealed as delay. Not weakness, not repression, just the natural lag between event and emotion, between understanding and feeling. Even in joy, the lag can appear. A compliment might not warm you until later. A moment of connection may only register as meaningful in retrospect. Memory catches emotion like a net, long after the bird has flown. And so, when you find yourself crying for something that happened last week, last month, or even last year, don't question the timing. Emotion doesn't obey the hour. It arrives when it's ready. And when it does, it asks only to be felt, not judged, not rushed, not explained. Let the lag be part of the rhythm. A slow tide, arriving not on schedule, but always, eventually. You wake mid-sentence, a thought unfinished, urgent, electric, yet already fading. You don't remember the words, only the importance, as if some great truth had just been spoken. A revelation, a decision, a goodbye. The bed still warm, your heart still racing, and your mind clinging to the fading weight of something it insists mattered. This is the sleeping brain residual, the psychological residue left behind when your dreaming mind generates an emotion so powerful, so seemingly meaningful, that it bleeds into waking life and distorts your sense of what's real. You sit upright in silence, not confused, but moved, and you don't know why. Neuroscientists explain this as a function of REM sleep. The emotional centers of the brain remain highly active, while the rational regions are dimmed. The dreaming mind is free to assign significance without evidence, urgency without logic. And when you awaken mid-cycle, those unfiltered feelings survive the border crossing into consciousness, untranslated but heavy. Ancient cultures treated dreams not as fiction, but as messages. The Greeks believed in oneiroi, gods of dreams who passed through gates of horn and ivory. Dreams from ivory were false, but dreams from horn carried truth. And even if the imagery was nonsense, the feeling was never to be ignored. You might wake with tears and no memory, a soft euphoria, or the certainty that you just said goodbye to someone long gone. You check your phone. You touch the edge of the mattress. The world feels too light, too thin, because whatever you were holding on to felt deeper. Imagine yourself walking into morning carrying a phantom suitcase, no contents, no context, just the weight. You feel changed, but don't know by what. And all day, the echo of that dream hums under your thoughts, because sometimes the sleeping brain speaks louder than waking life. And even when the words vanish, the meaning refuses to leave. You sit with a feeling. Maybe it's sadness or joy or something murky in between. At first, it just is, unfiltered, full-bodied, like weather in the chest. But then, you look at it, you name it, try to understand it, and in doing so, something subtle slips. The emotion shifts, dulls, sharpens, evaporates, as if the very act of watching it has changed its shape. This is the observer uncertainty principle, not from physics, but from within the mind. A strange psychological effect where the instant you turn awareness inward, the thing you seek to examine begins to transform. Like trying to hold water in your hands, only to feel it seep through the cracks. In quantum mechanics, observing a particle's position changes its momentum. In the mind, observing an emotion alters its intensity. The silent storm that moved through you becomes narrative, judgment, analysis. The pure becomes processed. The raw becomes reorganized. You may try to sit with your feelings, as mindfulness practices suggest, but even that act creates a divide. You, the observer, and the emotion, now an object. The seamless experience becomes performance. Even grief begins to ask, am I being felt correctly? Some emotions shrink under observation, as if embarrassed. Others swell, craving attention. But few remain untouched, because consciousness isn't passive, it paints as it sees. And the more you try to know what you feel, the more the feeling dances out of reach. Still, there's something beautiful in that too. That emotions aren't fixed, but fluid. That awareness doesn't just reveal, but reshapes. And that maybe, just maybe, the part of you that watches is never separate from what it sees. So next time a feeling rises, and you try to catch it mid-flight, don't be surprised if it changes its wings. You didn't lose it, you simply touched it, and it moved. Imagine walking through your day as usual. Your body moves, your voice responds, your hands do what they're supposed to, but something feels misaligned, like you're operating at a slight delay, like you're watching it all happen from just outside yourself, not disconnected entirely, but not fully inside either, as if your mind is a house, and you're watching it through a window, waiting to be let back in. This is the inner distance mirage, a gentle, haunting form of self-detachment that many experience but few can describe. It's not pain, it's not panic. It's a quiet sense that something is missing, some bridge between you and the world, between you and yourself. Psychologists often place this feeling under derealization or depersonalization, where the mind, under stress or fatigue, retreats slightly from full presence. But outside of clinical terms, it's simply the experience of being elsewhere, even while you're right here. You might notice it during long nights, after too little sleep, or in moments of quiet overwhelm. You see your hands move, but they don't quite feel like yours. You hear your voice, but it sounds like playback. You respond in conversation, but part of you is observing, wondering when you'll return. Some describe it like walking through fog. Others, like being inside a movie that won't let you improvise your lines. It's not that you're gone, you're still thinking, still feeling. But there's distance, a pane of glass between you and the warmth of your own experience. This mirage often passes on its own, as gently as it arrived. But in its stillness, it reveals something strange, that even your sense of self can drift, that the mind, so intimately yours, can sometimes forget to unlock the front door. You're here, but you're also waiting to feel here again. You confide in someone. Maybe your voice cracks, maybe your eyes shift downward, and they look at you, not with judgment, but with soft worry. And in that moment, something flips. You're no longer focused on your own pain. You're flooded with concern for them, for how they must feel, seeing you like this. This is the recursive empathy trap, a gentle, looping paradox where compassion turns inward and outward at once. You feel bad for making someone feel bad about you feeling bad. It's not selfishness, it's not guilt, it's empathy multiplied by reflection. In psychological terms, this can emerge from heightened sensitivity to emotional cues, a trait often praised, yet rarely understood in its complexities. Mirror neurons fire, emotional regulation scrambles, your boundaries blur, their concern becomes your burden, their sadness, your responsibility, not because they asked you to carry it, but because you can't not pick it up. Throughout history, certain personalities, caretakers, mediators, peacemakers, have been shaped by this loop. People who learned, often early, that their pain made others uneasy, so they began to smile through grief, apologize mid-tears, or soften their own hurt to protect someone else's heart. But empathy, unchecked, can cannibalize itself. It becomes an echo chamber where no one is allowed to fully feel without worrying how the other is feeling about their feeling. Like two mirrors facing each other, no beginning, no end, just infinite reflection. If you've ever felt this loop tightening around your chest, take a breath. You are allowed to be witnessed, allowed to be the receiver, not the regulator. Your sorrow is not a burden. It is not too heavy. The ones who care for you do not need shielding. So tonight, release the loop. Let concern rest. Let empathy flow one way, just for now. You are not selfish for being seen. You are human, and that is enough. Imagine waking from a dream, the fragments still shimmering at the edges of your mind. You recall a swirling sky, a face half seen, footsteps echoing in an unknown hallway. Yet much of the story feels incomplete, gaps where details should be. But when you try to recount the dream, something curious happens. Your brain, unwilling to leave holes, quietly fills those missing parts. The dream's narrative smooths over. What was once fragmented becomes seamless, as if those pieces had always been there. This is the memory paste function, our brain's subtle tendency to patch incomplete memories with plausible details, stitching fragments into a coherent whole. Dreams, with their fleeting, impressionistic nature, are especially vulnerable. Unlike waking memories, dreams don't get recorded with precision. Instead, they exist as ephemeral snapshots, impressions, and emotions. When you recall a dream, your mind acts like a restorer of ancient frescoes, filling in cracks with color, texture, and shape based on your knowledge, desires, and fears. The face you vaguely glimpsed may become someone you know. The strange place might turn into your childhood home. The story gains continuity, even if that continuity is imagined. Psychologists studying memory reconstruction find that this filling in happens constantly, not only with dreams, but waking events too. Every time you revisit a memory, your brain edits, reinterprets, and repaints. It's not deception, but a survival strategy. Our minds prefer stories over confusion, coherence over chaos. In a way, the memory paste function is a gift. It allows your mind to make sense of the mysterious, to turn random fragments into meaning. But it also warns us to be gentle with our memories, especially dreams. What feels vivid and complete might be part truth, part imagination, part silent correction. So next time you tell a dream, remember, the story you tell is both your mind's creation and your soul's whisper. Neither wholly real nor entirely made up, just a patchwork woven from the threads of night and mind. Your mid-conversation, words flowing from your mouth, familiar phrases, the rhythm of dialogue. But then, suddenly, something shifts. You hear yourself speak as if from a distance, like an actor reciting lines written by someone else. The meaning feels detached, your voice unfamiliar, as if you're watching a scene rather than living it. This is the disconnection while speaking effect, a subtle form of dissociation where your sense of agency slips away just enough to make you feel like an observer of your own speech. It's as if your brain briefly separates the speaker from the actor, leaving you in a liminal space between participation and performance. Neurologists explain this through disruptions in the brain's self-monitoring systems. Normally, when you talk, your brain predicts your own words and movements, matching intention with action. But when this predictive system falters, Due to fatigue, stress, or anxiety, it creates a gap. Your voice becomes a script played back, rather than a genuine expression. Historically, this sensation has been linked to trance states and ritual possession, where speakers lose conscious control but continue to articulate words with precision. In modern times, many describe it during moments of intense social pressure or exhaustion, feeling like a puppet on strings, performing roles shaped by expectation rather than desire. Imagine yourself standing behind a glass wall, hearing your own voice echo from the other side. The words are yours, but the feeling is hollow. You keep talking, yet a quiet part of you wonders, who's really in control? This effect is neither rare nor pathological. It's a glimpse into the complex dance between consciousness and automaticity, how we sometimes slip into acting out our roles before we even realize the script was handed to us. And as you speak again, the feeling fades until it returns. A subtle reminder, sometimes the voice you hear isn't always the one you chose. You glance sideways and catch a flicker, movement just beyond clear sight, a shadow shifting, a flash of color. Your heart quickens for a moment, but when you turn, nothing is there. The space is empty, silent, still. It's as if reality hiccuped, stuttered, and then recovered before you fully registered the glitch. This is the perception misfire blur, a subtle misalignment in how your senses process the world around you. The brain's visual system constantly scans the environment, especially the edges of your vision, to detect threats or changes. Sometimes, in the rush to keep you safe, it fires off a false alarm, a blur of movement, a ghostly figure that vanishes before confirmation. Neurologically, this can be explained as a momentary lag or miscommunication between your eyes and brain. Tiny delays, conflicting signals, or noise in the neural pathways create phantom motion. Your mind fills in gaps rapidly to make sense of incomplete data, sometimes conjuring movement where none exists. But the experience is more than biological. It carries an eerie weight, the feeling that something just slipped through your perception, a whisper of another presence, a shadow crossing boundaries unseen. Cultures throughout history have told stories of spirits and watchers glimpsed only briefly at the edge of vision, too quick to grasp, too fleeting to capture. This fleeting uncertainty unsettles because it reminds us that perception is not a perfect mirror. Reality doesn't always reveal itself fully. Sometimes it teases, blurs, or momentarily slips out of reach. So next time you glimpse that blur and it vanishes like a secret never meant to be told, don't rush to dismiss it. It's a quiet reminder that the world is far richer and stranger than your eyes alone can see. And sometimes it chooses to keep its secrets just beyond your sight. Imagine standing beneath a fading sunset, the sky painted in soft hues of amber and rose. You breathe it in, the warmth, the stillness. But in that moment, gratitude feels elusive, slipping just out of reach. It is only after the sun has disappeared, after the colors have dimmed into memory, that a wave of thankfulness washes over you. You realize then what you had just experienced, as if gratitude waits for the moment to become the past. This is the gratitude timing illusion, the curious tendency for appreciation to bloom not in the present, but only once a moment has passed. Gratitude becomes less about living within the experience and more about recalling it. It is gratitude as memory, rather than presence. Psychologists have noted this pattern in countless studies. The human mind often delays emotional recognition, favoring reflection over immediate sensation. This delay creates a bittersweet paradox. The very things we long to be grateful for can feel invisible until they become distant. Ancient poets hinted at this truth. They spoke of retrospective grace, the understanding that beauty is sometimes best savored through the lens of absence. The Japanese concept of mono, no aware, the gentle sadness of transient things, captures this feeling precisely. It acknowledges that impermanence sharpens appreciation, but only after the fact. You may have felt this yourself. The quiet moment after a goodbye, the stillness following laughter, the hush after a storm. In the present, life unfolds quietly, without ceremony. But when it settles behind you, gratitude blooms fully, rich, deep, and often tinged with longing. Perhaps gratitude is less a gift to the now, and more a soft echo that follows. A watermark left on memory's page, reminding you of the beauty that passed through. And so, the present slips away, carrying with it the quiet pulse of thankfulness. When you recall a moment, perhaps a conversation, a mistake, or a failure, you trust the memory as truth. Yet beneath the surface, your brain is quietly at work, weaving a story not just of what happened, but of what should have happened. It edits, reshapes, and smooths the edges to protect a fragile guest, your ego. This is the self-preserving story filter, an internal editor tirelessly revising your past to cast you in a better light. Details may shift, your role may grow smaller or larger, depending on what feels safer. Moments of vulnerability shrink, moments of control expand. The story told becomes less about raw fact and more about emotional survival. Psychologists call this a form of motivated memory, your mind's way of shielding your self-image from discomfort. It's not conscious deceit, it's a gentle censorship, a kindness wrapped in illusion. You might remember standing up for yourself when you quietly acquiesced, or forget the awkward silence after a harsh word. These changes happen seamlessly, unnoticed, like a river slowly changing course. Even famous diarists, known for honesty, occasionally polished their tales, showing how universal this filter is. It's a survival mechanism built deep into our biology, helping us maintain self-worth, confidence, and the continuity of identity across time. Imagine your memories as paintings, not photographs, but brushstrokes shaped by feeling. The picture changes with every glance, softening wounds, highlighting triumphs. You trust the image because it feels right, but beneath the surface lies the constant work of protection, quiet, unseen, relentless. As you drift to sleep, let this filter rest. Know that your memories, like you, are imperfect and human. And in imperfection lies the gentle truth of who you are, ever evolving, ever forgiving, ever whole. Imagine holding a tiny, ordinary object, a cracked pebble, a faded photograph, a random word on a page. You stare at it, turning it over in your mind, searching for a hidden message, a secret significance. The longer you look, the more your thoughts spiral. Patterns emerge where none exist. Connections form between unrelated things. Suddenly, the pebble isn't just a stone, it's a symbol, a sign, a cosmic whisper. This is the meaning overload collapse, when the brain's hunger for significance outpaces reality and invention takes the place of fact. Humans are pattern seekers. It's how we survive. Spotting meaning in chaos helps us predict dangers, recognize allies, and navigate uncertainty. But this system has limits. When pushed too far, it begins to see links in randomness, narratives where none belong. Psychologists call this apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections in meaningless data. It explains why people see shapes in clouds, faces in shadows, or messages in static noise. Under stress or fatigue, the mind's filters loosen. The threshold for what counts as meaningful drops. In moments of intense searching, waiting for a sign, longing for answers, the brain can spiral. It reaches for significance in fragments, in whispers, in chants. The collapse happens when the mind exhausts evidence and begins to create meaning from pure emptiness. The result can feel profound and convincing, but it's a fragile illusion. Ancient storytellers understood this. Folk tales warn of the dangers of reading too deeply into omens or dreams. They remind us that not every coincidence carries weight. Sometimes, the universe simply is, silent, indifferent, and vast. So, when you find yourself chasing meaning in the smallest detail, take a breath. Let the silence hold space. Sometimes, the truest understanding comes not from invention, but from accepting mystery without explanation. You're sitting across from someone, calm and focused, when suddenly you realize you're already answering a question that hasn't been asked. Your mouth moves with certainty, your thoughts racing ahead, as if your mind slipped forward in time without your consent. The words arrive early, unexpected, and the other person hasn't even begun to speak. This is the conversational preview glitch, a curious lapse in the flow of dialogue where your brain anticipates a question or statement so fully it begins responding before the cue. It feels like a mental leapfrog, but one that unsettles because it breaks the usual rhythm of turn-taking, blurring the line between thought and speech. Cognitive science reveals this as the result of the brain's prediction machinery working overtime. Our minds constantly scan for patterns and likely scenarios, rehearsing responses to keep communication smooth, but sometimes this predictive system accelerates too fast, bypassing social cues and prompting premature answers. In fast-paced conversations, especially under stress or excitement, this glitch happens often. You may finish a friend's sentence or answer a boss's question before it's fully formed. Though it can feel like mind reading, it often leaves you feeling exposed, like you revealed intentions or worries too soon. Historically, skilled orators mastered the art of anticipation, preparing responses in advance to steer conversations. But the glitch is an unintended side effect when rehearsal outpaces reality and the script jumps ahead of the scene. Imagine yourself standing on a stage, lines swirling in your mind, but the spotlight hasn't hit you yet. You speak out of turn, the silence thick for a moment, and then the dialogue resumes, but you're already one step ahead. Catching up feels awkward, like rewinding a recorded speech. This preview glitch reminds us how delicate conversation really is, a dance of timing, attention, and restraint. Sometimes, the mind's eagerness to connect moves just a little too fast, and the moment slips ahead before you're ready. You say a word aloud, simple, clear. Hello. Now. Quiet. But for a fraction of a second, something feels out of sync. The sound escapes your lips, yet the thought behind it lingers, trailing like a shadow struggling to catch up. It's as if your brain and voice are running different races, separated by a thin but perceptible delay. This is the mental lag echo, a subtle disconnect between intention and expression. When you speak, your brain prepares the meaning, selects the sounds, and sends signals to your mouth, all in an intricate dance of timing. Yet sometimes, the thought behind your word arrives a moment too late, echoing just behind the spoken sound. Imagine throwing a stone into still water. The splash rings out immediately, but the ripples, the deeper meaning, follow slowly, spreading outward. Your voice is the splash. The thought is the ripple, trying to keep pace. Neurologists suggest this lag can happen when the brain's language centers and speech muscles fall out of perfect harmony. Fatigue, distraction, or even the normal quirks of cognition can stretch this tiny gap. You hear the word, yet the thought feels like it's playing catch-up. This effect isn't just about speech. It reflects a larger truth about consciousness itself, that the mind is a series of overlapping processes, never perfectly aligned. Your sense of now is really a brief echo chamber, with signals bouncing slightly out of phase. So next time you speak and feel that fleeting delay, listen to the echo. It reminds you that even your own mind can be a step behind itself. And in that delay lies a quiet mystery, that who you are is never quite synchronized, always a moment unfolding, a shadow chasing a light. Imagine settling into a quiet evening, a book in your hands or a film playing softly. You watch a character's story unfold, their struggles, their losses, their quiet moments of hope, and suddenly tears well up. You find yourself crying harder for this fictional life than for real people you know. The pain feels sharper, deeper, and yet somehow it's confusing. Why does a made-up story touch you more than your own? This is the comfort from fiction loop, a paradox where our hearts open wider to imagined lives than to the complexities of our own. Fiction creates a safe space where emotions can be felt freely without the messy weight of real-world consequences. It offers clarity, resolution, and a narrative arc that real life often lacks. Neuroscience reveals that when we engage with stories, the brain mirrors the emotions of characters, activating the same areas as real experiences. Empathy flows more easily toward crafted narratives because they are designed to guide us through emotional landscapes. No ambiguity, no distractions, just pure feeling. In contrast, real relationships carry layers of history, expectations, and unresolved tension. The unpredictability and complexity can dull immediate emotional responses. Fiction, in its simplicity and focus, becomes a sanctuary. You grieve a hero's loss not only because it's sorrowful, but because it's understood and contained. Writers and psychologists alike note this. Stories offer catharsis, a release valve for emotions that might otherwise be buried. We cry for characters because they give shape to feelings too difficult to express ourselves. And so, the loop closes. Fiction comforts by inviting you in, while real life often asks you to keep walls up. It's not that one pain is real and the other false. It's that the imagined offers a clarity and permission that reality sometimes withholds. In these moments, your heart is open, raw, and human, connecting to the stories that reflect your own hidden depths. Imagine standing close to someone whose heart pounds with anxiety. You feel it too, a sudden tightness in your chest, a shadow passing behind your eyes. But whose fear is this? Yours? Theirs? Or something shared between you without clear borders? This is the boundary leak effect, a subtle dissolving of emotional lines that normally separate one mind from another. Empathy deepens until it blurs into something more indistinct, borrowed worry, imported dread, emotions slipping through invisible cracks. Our brains evolved to connect, to read faces and tones, to mirror feelings for social survival. Mirror neurons fire like delicate bridges between selves, creating a flow of shared experience. But sometimes, those bridges weaken the walls. The fear of another becomes your own. You carry what wasn't yours to begin with. In crowded places, at tense gatherings, or during moments of vulnerability, this emotional osmosis intensifies. You might notice an unexplained unease, a heaviness not rooted in your story, but tangled in the stories of those around you. Throughout history, healers, shamans, and caregivers recognized this. They sought rituals to cleanse these invisible leaks, to reclaim emotional boundaries and restore balance. Today, psychology calls it emotional contagion. It is not weakness, but the profound cost of deep connection. Imagine emotion as water held in separate vessels. Usually the sides hold steady, but sometimes cracks appear, and water flows freely between. The boundaries soften, the contents mix, and the line between self and other becomes a ripple rather than a wall. As you settle into rest tonight, breathe deeply. Feel your own pulse beneath the flood. Let borrowed fears wash away like tide, returning to the sea. Your emotions belong to you, and in the quiet, your boundaries mend, stronger, clearer, whole once more. Imagine waking from sleep with a heart still pounding, or a strange ache nestled deep in your chest. You remember a dream, vivid, intense, where someone you know was angry or loving or distant. Yet, when you see them in daylight, they are perfectly normal. They said nothing hurtful. They did nothing to provoke. And still, your feelings remain tangled, a residue left behind by the night's illusions. This is the dream trigger residue, a strange echo where emotions stirred in dreams spill over into waking life, coloring your perceptions and responses to people who never actually caused them. Your mind, unable to separate the dream's narrative from reality, carries the emotional weight forward. Dreams are not random. They're woven from memories, desires, fears, and fragments of our waking experiences. But they play by different rules, blurring time, bending logic, reshuffling roles. In dreams, someone you love might betray you, or a stranger might show kindness you never witnessed. When the dream ends, those feelings do not simply vanish. They linger, unanchored from real events, yet real in their emotional charge. Psychologists note how dream content can influence mood and behavior long after waking. A nightmare can shadow an entire day with unease. A joyful dream can lift spirits unexpectedly. But when dreams involve specific people, the line between dream and reality grows fragile. You may feel resentment, longing, or fear toward them, even though they remain unchanged. In some cultures, dreams were believed to carry messages, warnings, blessings, or curses. Whether or not you believe in such things, the dream trigger residue shows how deeply sleep shapes our inner world. It reminds us that feelings are not always logical, not always tied to facts, but often to the stories we tell ourselves in the silence of night. So when you notice a sudden wave of emotion towards someone, ask yourself, did the day bring it or the night? And allow space for both to be true. You reach inside yourself for words to describe a feeling, something deep, layered, perhaps aching. But the vocabulary falters, the mind stutters, sentences fall short, meanings slip away like smoke through your fingers. What remains is a silent weight, heavy and unmoving, lodged quietly in your chest. This is the inner language collapse, the moment when emotion surpasses expression, when the richness of feeling overwhelms the mind's capacity to translate it into language. Words, usually the bridge between thought and world, suddenly feel inadequate, too small to hold what stirs inside. Neuroscientists note that language and emotion occupy overlapping but distinct neural circuits. The emotional brain processes nuance, ambiguity, and sensation, while language relies on defined symbols and structure. When an experience is too subtle or intense, these systems misalign, leaving you grasping at silence. Poets and philosophers have long described this tension. Rilke called it the unsayable, the space where meaning exists beyond words, a quiet realm of pure presence. The Japanese speak of mu, the void where language ceases and experience simply is. It is here, in the gap between thought and speech, that the inner language collapse unfolds. You might feel it in grief too profound for lament, or in awe too vast for praise, in moments when joy overwhelms or when despair dulls. The sensation is neither loss nor emptiness, but a fullness without form, a stillness that asks only to be felt, not named. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a silent forest, no birdsong, no wind, only the thick pulse of your own breath. Words could never capture this quiet, yet it presses on you with undeniable presence. And so, sometimes, the deepest parts of ourselves speak in silence, because some feelings are too complex for language to hold, and in that collapse, a strange peace can be found, the quiet weight of what can only be. You sit quietly, mind wandering, when suddenly a thought emerges, dark, unsettling, almost taboo. It's a glimpse of yourself doing something you'd never admit aloud, a hidden impulse flickering into awareness. But strangely, it doesn't feel entirely foreign. There's a familiarity, a haunting echo, like meeting a twin lurking underground, hidden beneath the surface of your everyday self. This is the shadow self interruption, that moment when your mind reveals a side you don't usually acknowledge. Psychologists call it the shadow, a collection of desires, fears, and traits suppressed by your conscious identity. It's not evil or alien, but the unseen counterpart that balances who you present to the world. Imagine your psyche as a house with many rooms. Most days you stay in the sunlit parlor where kindness, reason, and calm reside. But somewhere below, in the basement, the shadow self waits, quiet, complex, and strangely familiar. When that dark thought surfaces, it's as if the basement door creaks open just a crack, letting a whisper escape. This twin is not your enemy. It's part of the whole. Like the night to your day, the depth to your height. And though its presence may startle you, it's also a reminder of your complexity, a proof that identity isn't simple or fixed, but layered and fluid. Many spiritual traditions embrace this shadow, inviting us to meet it without fear, to recognize that darkness and light coexist within, weaving the tapestry of self. So, when a thought interrupts you, alien, dark, yet hauntingly familiar, don't turn away. Listen closely. You might just be hearing the other half of your soul. Imagine hearing a familiar song drifting through the air or catching a sudden scent, a trace of rain on dry earth, the faint perfume of a forgotten flower. Instantly, you're pulled away. The present fades as your mind drifts into a memory not just remembered, but relived. You become someone else, a younger self, a self long buried beneath layers of years and experience. You feel the emotions you thought you'd left behind, raw and vivid, as if time had folded back on itself. This is the emotional flashback trigger, a phenomenon where sensory cues unlock hidden chambers of memory, bypassing conscious thought to immerse you fully in past moments. Unlike a simple recollection, an emotional flashback is visceral, immersive, and often unexpected. It pulls you out of who you are now and plunges you into who you once were. Psychologists observe this in trauma survivors, but it's a universal experience to some degree. Our brains store emotions not just as abstract data, but as sensory imprints, smells, sounds, tastes, that serve as keys. When triggered, these keys open doors to feelings and memories tucked away, sometimes for decades. Neuroscientists note that the amygdala, the brain's emotional center, processes sensory information quickly and can override the slower, rational parts of the brain. This is why a simple song or smell can feel overwhelming, bypassing explanation and plunging you into sensation. You might notice it during quiet moments, a melody from childhood, the scent of old books, a certain spice in the air, and suddenly the past breathes again, filling the room with shadows and light. In these moments, you are not lost, but found, reconnected to the roots of your story, to the emotions that shaped you. The present and past merge, and you carry both versions within you, held together by these flickering triggers. You fix your gaze on a single letter, say, the letter S. At first, it feels familiar, a building block of words and meaning. But as seconds pass and your focus sharpens, something subtle shifts. The letter begins to lose its weight, its purpose. It's no longer a symbol of sound or idea. It becomes a curve, a shape, a line curling on the page. This is the meaningless symbol saturation, a quiet unraveling of language under intense scrutiny. When the mind stares too long at a letter, a word, or a phrase, the usual connection between symbol and meaning slips away. The shapes become abstract, empty vessels, curves and angles suspended in space, stripped of their story. Psychologists call this effect semantic satiation. It's as if the brain, overwhelmed by repetition or focus, presses pause on understanding. The familiar feels foreign. The meaningful turns absurd. A word once loaded with history and emotion becomes a random arrangement of marks, no more significant than a doodle. Ancient meditators sometimes used this phenomenon to detach from the constant chatter of thoughts. Repeating a mantra until it lost meaning, they found a doorway to silence beyond words. Modern poets have marveled at this too, a reminder that language is fragile, its power resting on invisible threads. Consider how much of your world depends on these threads: words, signs, symbols, binding experience into story. And yet, stare too hard, and they dissolve, revealing the thinness beneath. A reminder that meaning is a gift we give, a dance we choose to join. Tonight, if your thoughts loop or your mind fixates, let the symbols fade. Watch letters lose their shape, words fall apart. In the collapse of meaning, find the quiet space where understanding isn't needed. There, beyond the noise of language, rest awaits. Imagine trying to remember a major event, your first day at a new job, a childhood birthday party, a conversation that shaped you. Yet those memories blur, slip away, or feel distant. But out of nowhere, an odd detail surfaces. A crack in the sidewalk on a Tuesday afternoon 14 years ago. The scent of rain on old leather. The sound of a distant lawnmower. That fragment seems sharper, clearer, more present than the moments you thought mattered most. This is the memory reprioritization glitch. your brain's mysterious, secret system that ranks memories not by importance, but by something less obvious. Memory is not a perfect archive. It's a living, shifting landscape where what we recall depends less on significance and more on how the mind encoded and reinforced the moment. Emotion, repetition, novelty, and even randomness play roles. Some memories embed deeply because they triggered strong feelings. Others linger because they were rehearsed or retold. And sometimes, seemingly trivial details hitch a ride on emotional undercurrents or sensory cues, becoming more vivid than the core event. Neuroscience shows us that the hippocampus, the brain's memory hub, doesn't treat all information equally. Instead, it prioritizes based on salience, relevance to survival, and emotional intensity. But it's not flawless. Moments experienced during times of stress or distraction can be jumbled or suppressed, while incidental details, caught in a moment of calm or heightened awareness, remain bright. In ancient oral traditions, storytellers often remembered small details that helped anchor larger narratives. The crack in the pavement, the color of the sky, these were cues to reconstruct fuller stories. Perhaps the brain evolved similarly, to keep some fragments vivid as anchors, even if the whole picture fades. So when you find yourself recalling that odd Tuesday afternoon detail instead of the big event, remember, your mind isn't broken. It's working on a system designed for survival, connection, and meaning, not perfect recall. It's selecting pieces that it believes will guide you forward, even if the logic escapes conscious understanding. You suddenly recall a moment from years ago, something awkward, a stumble of words, a glance misplaced. The scene rushes back in vivid detail, the flush rising to your cheeks, the stammer in your voice, the feeling of eyes burning into you. Though time has stretched wide since then, your body reacts as if it just happened. Your heart quickens, your skin tingles, and the blush returns unbidden. This is the imagined embarrassment echo, a powerful replay of past discomfort that reverberates through your present self. Unlike ordinary memory, this echo is felt physically, a somatic shadow that time cannot fully erase. Your brain reconstructs not only the event, but the emotion so deeply that your body remembers its original response. Neuroscientists link this to the brain's strong connection between emotional memory and bodily sensation. The amygdala, responsible for processing fear and social threat, reactivates alongside regions controlling physical reaction. It's as if the body relives the moment, even though the mind knows it's long gone. Social psychologists call this self-conscious affect, where imagined or real judgment leaves traces embedded in both mind and muscle. The longer the embarrassment lingered, or the more it touched a core vulnerability, the more vividly it can echo through time. Cultures around the world understand the power of shame and embarrassment as social glue and personal punishment. In ancient Greek tragedy, moments of humiliation were catalysts for transformation. Painful, but necessary. Yet in daily life, these echoes often trap us in loops of self-judgment and hesitation. Imagine yourself sitting quietly, feeling a sudden warmth flood your face. The room is silent, yet you hear the laughter, the awkward silence, the collective gaze from years ago. And though you know it's just memory, your body betrays the truth. The past still lives here, in your breath, your pulse, your blush. And so, embarrassment is never just a memory. It is a ghost with a pulse, an echo you wear long after the moment has passed. You sit quietly and gaze down at your hands, the familiar shapes, the subtle lines tracing stories on your skin. But something feels off. Like those hands belong to someone else, the moment stretches and pulls away, as if the present is a step removed from your grasp. You are here, but not quite here. A silent displacement between you and the now. This is the present tense displacement, a fleeting sensation where time's immediacy slips away, leaving you slightly untethered. Your body feels like a distant vessel, and your awareness floats just beyond its reach. The present moment, instead of being a vivid anchor, becomes a pale reflection seen through fogged glass. Neuroscience explains this in part through disruptions in how the brain integrates sensory input and self-awareness. When the usual flow falters, the seamless experience of now fractures. Your perception lags, leaving a gap between feeling and being. Philosophers have long pondered this sensation. The idea that the present is not a fixed point, but a thin, shifting veil, always just beyond full capture. Some liken it to watching yourself in a dream, aware but disconnected. This experience can be unsettling or strangely peaceful. It reminds you that your sense of presence isn't guaranteed, but fragile and dynamic, constantly rebuilt from moment to moment. So when your hands seem not quite your own, and the now feels a step removed, don't rush to ground yourself. Instead, gently observe the space in between. Because sometimes, the most profound awareness lies in the quiet distance from ourselves. Imagine lying still in your bed, the room wrapped in darkness and silence. Your body is ready for rest, your eyes heavy, but your mind remains awake, alert, circling a single thought: I need to fall asleep. You focus on the idea of sleeping, thinking about sleep itself, hoping that this intention will pull you gently into rest. Yet the more you think, the more elusive sleep becomes. Minutes stretch into hours. The paradox tightens its grip. This is the sleep state paradox, a familiar yet frustrating experience where the very act of trying to sleep becomes the obstacle to sleep itself. When you focus attention on the process of falling asleep, you engage brain regions responsible for alertness and self-monitoring, preventing the natural shift into unconsciousness. Sleep is, in many ways, an involuntary act. It arrives quietly, slipping beneath awareness, a gradual dimming of the mind's spotlight. But when the spotlight is trained on sleep itself, it blinds the process. The mind remains awake, analyzing, anticipating, and worrying. Scientists studying insomnia have found that this paradox fuels a cycle of frustration and wakefulness. The more one obsesses over sleep, the more the brain interprets this as a signal to stay alert. It's a feedback loop, a loop where intention contradicts outcome. Ancient meditation traditions advise letting go of the chase. Instead of demanding sleep, they suggest gently releasing thought, observing without attachment. The moment intention softens, the mind can surrender. Sleep flows not as a goal, but as a consequence. You may have felt this on restless nights, eyes wide, heart racing, the clocks ticking amplified in the silence. The harder you try, the more sleep recedes, as if hiding just beyond your grasp. The sleep state paradox reminds us that some things come only when we stop reaching. That rest is not won through effort, but through surrender. You recall a moment from your past, a sharp word spoken by someone else, a failure you witnessed but didn't cause. Yet, when your mind replays the scene, it adds an invisible twist. Suddenly, you're the one at fault. The mistake was yours. The blame, your burden. This is the memory guilt injection, a quiet, insidious rewriting of past events that shifts responsibility onto your shoulders, even when it doesn't belong there. It's not deliberate or conscious. It's a subtle distortion, a narrative slip that colors your memory with unjust guilt. Psychologists explain this as part of a protective mechanism. By absorbing blame, even wrongly, the brain tries to maintain relationships, avoid conflict, or make sense of chaotic emotions. Sometimes, carrying guilt feels like control, an attempt to fix what was never broken by you. Throughout history, people have told similar stories. Survivors of hardship often replay moments with this skewed lens, feeling shame where none is due. Parents may blame themselves for things beyond their power. Friends replay conversations wishing they'd said something different, even when the fault lay elsewhere. Imagine your memory as a painting, with shadows deepening over certain figures, shadows not cast by reality, but by your own inner fears and hopes. The image looks familiar, but feels heavier, darker. You trust it because it's yours, but it's been tinted by unseen hands. As you drift to sleep tonight, hold gentle space for these memories. Recognize that blame may be a visitor, not a resident. You are not the author of every sorrow you carry. Sometimes, the heart needs permission to lay down its burdens and rest in truth. Imagine sitting quietly, and a thought surfaces, a worry, a question, a fleeting idea. You consider it briefly, then move on. But moments later, the same thought returns, not just once, but again and again, bouncing back through your mind like footsteps echoing down a long, empty hallway. You realize you're not just thinking the thought, you're rethinking it, caught in a loop. This is the thought reflection delay, where your mind's echoes turn simple ideas into repeated reverberations. Our brains work through ideas by processing, evaluating, and storing them. But sometimes, the timing between these steps blurs. Instead of letting a thought settle, the mind sends it back for review, an internal replay system that delays closure. The echo can feel like rumination, repetitive and restless, a mental ping-pong that refuses to end. Psychologists link this to how we monitor our own cognition, called metacognition. We often catch ourselves doubting or questioning thoughts, especially those tied to uncertainty or anxiety. The more we focus on a particular idea, the stronger its echo becomes, filling mental space and resisting dismissal. This delay can be both a trap and a tool. It traps when thoughts circle endlessly, sapping calm and clarity. But it helps when reflection deepens understanding, allows problem solving, or encourages insight. The key lies in balance, recognizing when echoes are useful and when they are noise. In some meditative practices, attention is gently guided away from repetitive thoughts, allowing the mind to rest. Instead of chasing echoes, practitioners learn to observe them without engagement, watching footsteps fade down the corridor rather than following. So next time you notice a thought returning like a refrain, remember, it's not new, but a reflection. And sometimes, the space between echoes is where peace quietly waits. All day, your thoughts speak to you quietly, familiar tones, the voice you know best. It's your internal companion, the narrator of your life story, soft and constant. You don't notice it much until one day the voice shifts. It sounds different, slightly altered, stranger, like an echo speaking from just beyond your grasp. This is the disembodied internal monologue, a subtle yet unsettling change in the inner voice that guides your thinking. For most of us, the voice inside our heads is steady, familiar, almost like our own speech rehearsed silently. But sometimes, whether through stress, fatigue, or emotional shifts, that voice detaches. It becomes less you and more a stranger's whisper. Cognitive scientists suggest that the internal monologue arises from neural processes linking language, memory, and self-awareness. When these networks falter or reorganize due to mood, trauma, or mental fatigue, the tone or timbre of the inner voice may morph. It's as if your mind borrows a new accent, a different rhythm, or a voice from a distant place. In literature and psychology, this phenomenon has been explored as a marker of identity fragmentation. Writers like Virginia Woolf described moments where their inner speech seemed to detach, creating an uncanny sense of self-observation or alienation. Even in meditation, practitioners sometimes report hearing their thoughts in unexpected ways. Imagine yourself sitting quietly, hearing the familiar hum of your thoughts, then catching a note that's off-key, a phrase repeated with unfamiliar inflection. The voice feels like a visitor, polite but distant, narrating your life from another room. You listen closely, wondering whose voice this really is, yours or a reflection you never expected. And though the voice may change, the story it tells remains yours to rewrite. Because even when your inner voice drifts, you hold the pen. You remember closing the door behind you, turning the key, feeling the satisfying click. You're absolutely sure. The image plays clearly in your mind like a familiar scene. But then, without warning, doubt creeps in. Was the key fully turned? Did you actually hear the lock engage? The memory shifts, rewriting itself in real time, flickering between certainty and suspicion. The door you trusted as locked suddenly feels open again. This is the certainty collapse event, a moment when your confidence in memory unravels unexpectedly, leaving you caught between what you believe happened and what might have been. Our minds do not store memories like photographs, but like stories, edited continuously by attention, emotion, and new information. When doubt seeps in, it can reshape those stories, casting familiar moments into unfamiliar light. Psychologists describe this as a form of memory reconsolidation, each recall slightly altering the memory itself. The past isn't fixed, it's fluid, constantly rewritten by your present state. This makes certainty a fragile illusion. Imagine walking down a path you've traveled thousands of times. Suddenly, the trail seems different. Stones rearranged, landmarks missing. Your mind hesitates, questioning the landscape it once knew. That's what certainty collapse feels like, a disorienting pause in your inner narrative. Yet, this uncertainty also reminds us that memory and reality are not perfect mirrors. They are dynamic, adaptive processes designed more for survival than accuracy. So next time you're sure of something and then suddenly not, remember this: your mind isn't failing. It's simply recalibrating between what was and what could be. Imagine sensing the weight of someone else's pain, the quiet tremor in their voice, the shadow behind their smile. You absorb it, deeply and instinctively. But then, a new feeling takes hold: blame. Blame for not fixing it, for not doing enough, for the helplessness that knots inside you. That blame spirals into guilt, and guilt fans the flames of pain until you find yourself caught in a relentless cycle of suffering that feels impossible to escape. This is the empathy backdraft loop, a psychological firestorm where compassion ignites self-reproach, feeding itself in a destructive spiral. You feel deeply, but the very act of feeling becomes a burden, tightening the grip of pain on both you and the one you care for. Neuroscience tells us that empathy activates brain regions tied to both understanding and emotional resonance. When we witness another's suffering, our mirror neurons reflect their pain as if it were our own. While this connection can foster kindness and support, it also risks overwhelming us when solutions feel out of reach. The loop begins when empathy collides with responsibility. Feeling someone's pain stirs a desire to help. When help seems impossible, self-blame arises, whispering that you should have done more. That whisper grows louder, feeding a cycle of emotional backdraft. The more guilt you feel, the more pain you absorb, and the harder it becomes to step away. Ancient wisdom counsels boundaries in compassion, knowing when to hold space and when to release. Like a firefighter retreating to breathe, caring without burning out requires balance. You may have felt this loop in moments of close connection, when a friend's sorrow becomes your own and the weight feels too heavy to carry alone. It's a reminder that empathy is powerful, but without care for yourself, it can consume. The empathy backdraft loop calls for gentle release, a letting go that honors both your heart and your limits. You hold a coin between your fingers, ready to leave a choice to chance. Heads or tails, fair and simple. You flip it into the air, watching it spin, a blur of silver, suspended between fate and freedom. But before it lands, a quiet thought surfaces. You want it to land on heads. Maybe you never admitted it. Maybe you thought you were unbiased. But deep down, a preference pulses beneath the surface. This is the decision premonition effect, the subtle awareness, often unconscious, of your own desires before chance decides. The illusion of randomness feels pure, yet your mind has already tilted the scales. The coin toss becomes less a game of fate and more a silent battle between your hope and the spin. Psychologists have studied how humans struggle with true randomness. We seek patterns, we predict outcomes, and often, we unknowingly influence decisions by the strength of our wishes. This effect is not deception, but a quiet foreshadowing, your brain's way of signaling what it truly prefers, even when you ask it not to. History is full of moments where people claimed to surrender to chance, only to reveal later a hidden bias, an unspoken prayer whispered beneath the surface of the toss. It's the mind's gentle nudge, a soft premonition that shapes choice before choice arrives. Imagine flipping the coin again and again, each time knowing which side you hope for, yet telling yourself it's all up to fate. The dance between free will and desire is delicate, a whisper rather than a shout. So tonight, as you face decisions large or small, notice your own quiet premonitions. Let the awareness settle gently. Sometimes, the answer you seek is already written in the shadows of your hopes, waiting to be understood, not denied. Imagine reaching back into your past and pulling forth a single second, just one fleeting instant. But the clarity is so intense, so sharp, it feels as if you lived inside that moment far longer than the hours or days surrounding it. The colors glow brighter, the sounds ring clearer, the emotions press deeper. This is the memory frame freeze, where one frozen frame outshines the flow of time itself. Our memories rarely arrive as smooth, continuous tapes. Instead, they resemble flickering snapshots, some blurred, some crystal clear. Occasionally, a single fragment, the brushstroke of a smile, the touch of a hand, a sudden glance, remains carved into the mind with extraordinary vividness. In that fragment, time seems to stretch, as if that one moment contained more meaning, more life, than everything else around it. Neuroscience suggests that moments with intense emotional impact or novelty are encoded differently, marked by heightened activity in the amygdala and hippocampus. These brain regions tag certain experiences as important, preserving them like gems. The effect is that when you recall those moments, they feel elongated, deeply immersive, almost like stepping inside a time capsule. This phenomenon also links to how we experience time subjectively. Seconds of awe, fear, or profound connection can feel eternal, while hours of routine blur past unnoticed. The memory frame. Freeze captures that suspended feeling, an eternal heartbeat caught in a storm. Ancient poets and philosophers often spoke of eternal moments, instances where time folded back on itself, allowing a brief glimpse of timelessness. Modern science now echoes this truth. Our experience of time is not measured by clocks, but by the depth of memory and feeling. So when a single second from your past rises vividly, hold it gently. It is a window, a quiet testament to the moments that truly shaped your story, frozen in the flow of time. Sometimes a feeling rises, too vast, too strange, too layered for words to hold. You reach for language, but it slips away, dissolving into silence. Instead, your mind bursts open with images, flashes of color, shifting shapes, fragments of scenes that don't quite fit together. It's as if the usual channels of speech have closed, and your brain floods you with pure sensation instead. This is the language bypass surge, a moment when emotion or thought escapes verbal expression, compelling the mind to communicate through vivid mental imagery instead. The feeling is urgent, undeniable, yet frustratingly intangible, existing beyond the limits of grammar or vocabulary. Neuroscientists suggest that when the brain encounters complexity too deep for language, it activates the visual and sensory cortices, crafting an internal cinema where meaning plays out in symbols and sensations. These images may be abstract, a swirl of color or light, or concrete, like memories overlapping with dreams. Artists and poets have long sought to capture this phenomenon. Rimbaud described it as derangement of the senses, a state where perception breaks free of language's cage. The surrealists embraced the flood of images as truth beyond logic. Even children often communicate profound feelings through pictures before they find the words. Imagine yourself standing in a dark room searching for a key. Words hang just out of reach, but your mind conjures a flickering tapestry, a stormy sea, a wilted flower, a distant face. Each image pulses with meaning, pulling at your heart. They speak in Stillness, inviting you to feel what cannot be said. The language bypass. Surge reminds us, sometimes meaning is too complex for words, so the mind paints instead, using imagery to speak the unspeakable. You sit with a realization, a sudden flash of clarity that you've uncovered the truth behind an illusion. You think, now I see it, I understand the trick, but then the ground shifts beneath you. The insight itself begins to unravel. You realize that what you believed was truth is yet another layer of illusion. The very awareness that promised clarity was feeding the mirage all along. This is the cognitive mirage, an unsettling feedback loop where recognizing an illusion becomes another illusion itself. Your mind, in its quest to grasp reality, can become trapped in reflections of reflections. The more you try to pierce the veil, the more the veil reshapes itself, adapting to your gaze. Imagine staring into two mirrors facing each other, a corridor of endless images stretching beyond sight. Each reflection claims to be the original, but none is. Your insight is just one image in the hall, flickering and shifting with every blink. Philosophers have long warned about the limits of self-awareness. The mind can observe itself only so far before it begins to confuse the observer with the observed. Awareness, instead of revealing an objective truth, can multiply illusions, creating a hall of cognitive mirrors where certainty dissolves. Psychologists speak of metacognition, the mind thinking about its own thoughts, and how it can sometimes cause overanalysis, self-doubt, or confusion. Here, the clarity you seek is swallowed by the complexity of your own reflection. So when you feel sure you've cracked the illusion, pause, because the certainty of that insight might be part of the mirage, and the loop is still feeding, still spinning, inviting you deeper into the endless hall of shadows. Imagine falling quietly in love, not with a person, but with an idea. The idea of them, the stories you tell yourself about who they are, what they could be, and the life you imagine together. This love is soft, idealized, painted in broad, gentle strokes. It floats above reality, untouched by flaws or contradiction. But beneath that fragile bubble lies a delicate tension, waiting for the moment when the illusion begins to crack. This is the abstract affection drift, a subtle form of attachment to fantasy rather than fact. We create narratives about others to fill gaps in understanding or to shield ourselves from vulnerability. The mind clings to possibility, weaving stories more comforting than truth. Loving the idea feels safer than confronting the full complexity of a person. Psychologists recognize this as a form of emotional projection. We project desires, fears, and hopes onto others, creating an abstract version of affection that exists mostly in the imagination. It is a love without the messiness of real interaction, without the surprises and contradictions that flesh and blood relationships bring. But illusions are fragile. The first genuine moment, a harsh word, an unexpected absence, a quiet revelation, can shatter the construct. And when that happens, grief blooms, raw and undeniable, not just for the person, but for the version you loved and lost before you even met them fully. You may have felt this drift in the aftermath of a relationship's end or when longing for someone unreachable. It's the ache for what might have been, tangled with sorrow for what never truly was. In embracing reality, we risk heartbreak. Yet it is only there, in the honest meeting of selves, that love can grow beyond abstraction. The abstract affection drift teaches that love, built on illusion, always carries grief's shadow, but also opens the door to deeper understanding. You're sitting quietly, perhaps staring out a window or lying still in the dark, when suddenly a memory appears. Not summoned, not searched for. It simply arrives, unbidden and vivid. A fragment from years ago. A scent. A face. A fleeting conversation. You watch it unfold, puzzled. Why now? What called it forth? This is the autonomous memory retrieval, the spontaneous resurfacing of memories without conscious effort or clear cause. Unlike deliberate recall, these memories hijack your awareness, pulling you into a moment long past. often without warning or obvious trigger. Scientists suggest that the brain continuously sifts through its vast archive, linking sensory inputs, emotions, and associations. Sometimes, a quiet connection nudges a memory forward, like an unseen thread tugging at your mind's tapestry. Yet the origin of that tug often remains hidden, leaving you with a sense of mystery. Ancient storytellers spoke of memories as restless spirits, wandering freely until they find a moment to reveal themselves. In modern psychology, these sudden returns are reminders of how deeply our past is woven into the present, often beneath conscious thought. Imagine a train of thoughts traveling through a fog. Most of the time, you steer the engine, but occasionally, a ghostly car detaches and rolls into the light on its own, bringing with it a moment you thought forgotten. You're both passenger and witness, caught in a gentle surprise. Tonight, if a memory arrives uninvited, don't resist it. Let it drift through your mind like a quiet visitor. No need to question its purpose or chase its meaning. Sometimes, the past just wants to be seen, and then, gently, it fades back into the depths. Imagine opening a photo album of your own life. You see a younger version of yourself, full of dreams, mistakes, struggles, and triumphs. You remember the stories you told about that time, how you were brave, how you overcame, how you changed the world in your own way. Yet, beneath the nostalgia, there's a strange tension. That past self, the hero of your story, wouldn't recognize who you are today. And you barely recognize them. This is the chrono-ego dissonance, the emotional and psychological disconnect between your present identity and the person you once were. We tend to craft our personal history as a narrative, often casting ourselves as protagonist, hero, or survivor. But time alters us in ways subtle and profound. The thoughts, values, fears, and desires that shaped who you were then may now feel foreign, even alien. Psychologists explain this as a natural part of identity's fluidity. Our brains reconstruct memories not as fixed recordings, but as evolving stories, shaped by who we are now. The you, who recalls the past, is not the same you who lived it. This shift causes dissonance, a gap between self-perception across time. In ancient philosophy, Heraclitus said, "You cannot step into the same river twice. The river flows, changes, and so do we." The hero of yesterday is a character in today's story, a vital chapter, but no longer the lead. This dissonance can be unsettling. You might feel nostalgia mixed with estrangement, pride mingled with regret. But it also opens possibility. It means your story is still being written, that you are not bound by who you once were. So when you face your past self in memory's mirror, remember, it's okay not to recognize them. That unfamiliar hero was necessary then, but you have grown into someone new, and that growth, strange as it feels, is the heart of life itself. You brace yourself for pain. A sharp word, a sudden loss, the familiar ache you've rehearsed 100 times. But when the moment comes, the hurt is muted or absent entirely. Relief washes over you, almost disorienting in its softness. Or sometimes, you prepare for joy, the celebration, the warmth, the happiness promised, and it slips through your fingers, vanishing just as you reach for it. This is the emotional forecast glitch, a mismatch between what your mind predicts you will feel and the reality of the emotion that actually arrives. Like a weather forecast gone awry, your brain anticipates storms or sunshine, but the skies turn unexpectedly calm or gray. The discrepancy can leave you unmoored, questioning your own feelings or the events around you. Cognitive scientists explain this as a product of how the brain simulates future emotional states. To protect you, your mind often rehearses possible outcomes, sometimes exaggerating pain or joy to prepare you. But real experiences carry nuances your predictions miss, so expectations collide with unpredictability. Philosophers have long noted this tension. Kierkegaard described the despair of expectation, the quiet sorrow that comes when life refuses to match the feelings we anticipate. Even in Buddhist teachings, attachment to expected outcomes is a source of suffering, because reality rarely aligns perfectly with the mind's forecasts. Imagine yourself standing on a shore, waiting for waves to crash. Sometimes the tide rises gently, barely touching your feet. Other times, the crashing wave never comes, leaving a hollow hush. You can't trust your own emotional radar. It pulses ahead, but sometimes it leads you astray. The emotional forecast. Glitch teaches patience with feelings, that what you expect is never guaranteed, and what arrives may be unexpected, subtle, or absent altogether. It invites you to be present, welcoming each moment on its own terms, without the weight of prediction pulling you off balance. Sometimes, in quiet moments, you feel it, an almost imperceptible flicker at the edge of your awareness, a presence that isn't quite you, but something like you, a shadow of a life you never lived, the choices you didn't make, the roads you didn't take, drifting faintly close like a whisper carried on the wind. This is the parallel life flicker, a subtle sensation that another version of yourself exists, just out of reach, living in a world that almost overlaps with your own. Not a daydream nor regret, but something deeper, an echo of alternate possibilities that brush against your mind, momentarily shimmering into focus before fading. Scientists call these counterfactual thoughts, imagined scenarios of what might have been, yet the feeling transcends simple imagination. It is as if this flicker carries emotional weight, a presence that lingers like a scent after a door has closed. Philosophers have long pondered the idea of parallel selves, versions of you unfolding in alternate realities. Though unseen and unheard, these lives seem to touch ours, like ripples overlapping on a vast cosmic pond. The sensation can be bittersweet, a reminder of paths lost, identities unclaimed, yet it also speaks to the boundless nature of the self, not confined to one timeline or one story, but a vast constellation of possibilities. So when you catch that fleeting flicker, don't shy away. Let it brush past you like a gentle wind, for in that quiet moment, you're touching the infinite branches of your own existence and the vast, mysterious tapestry of what could have been. Imagine standing at a crossroads, not yet having chosen a path, but already feeling the weight of regret pressing down. You haven't acted, haven't decided, yet a quiet sorrow blooms inside you. It's as if regret is waiting, growing in the shadows before the moment has even arrived. This is the anticipated regret loop, a subtle, self-created cycle where you feel remorse not for what has been, but for what might be. Your mind projects into the future, imagining mistakes not yet made, losses not yet suffered, and in doing so, it traps you in a limbo of hesitation and sorrow. Psychologists have found that anticipated regret can be as powerful as actual regret, influencing decisions, emotions, and even behavior. It's a double-edged sword, a warning signal that helps avoid poor choices, yet also a heavy burden that can paralyze. In this loop, the mind rehearses what-ifs endlessly. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I fail? What if I lose this chance? The imagined outcomes take on emotional weight, growing more vivid with each turn. The regret becomes a ghost, haunting moments that haven't yet happened. Ancient philosophers counseled living in the present, accepting uncertainty without preemptive sorrow. Yet, the brain's tendency to forecast pain is deeply ingrained, a survival mechanism turned inward. You might notice this loop in quiet moments before big decisions, or in the restless mind at night, where fears and doubts multiply unchecked. The future feels heavy before it even arrives. The anticipated regret loop reminds us that regret is often not about loss, but about fear, and that sometimes the heaviest chains are the ones we forge ourselves. You hold a simple object, a cup, a pen, a worn sock, and suddenly it looks strange, foreign, as if you're seeing it for the very first time, stripped of all familiar meaning. The curves, the colors, the texture, all become unfamiliar, alien, almost surreal. This is the object dissociation field, a curious mental phenomenon where ordinary things lose their sense of familiarity under intense focus. The brain's usual patterns of recognition falter, and what once felt mundane now feels bizarre, as if freshly discovered. Psychologists call this a form of perceptual dissociation. When you stare too long, the automatic associations that give objects their identity pause. Without those connections, the object is no longer cup or pen, but just shapes, lines, and surfaces floating in space. The mind struggles to anchor meaning, leaving you with a sense of uncanny estrangement. Artists and philosophers have long noted this effect, how by breaking habitual perception, we can glimpse the world anew. What if your pen isn't a pen at all? What if it's a small sculpture of plastic and metal, shaped by chance and use? The ordinary becomes extraordinary. This experience is a reminder of how much our perception depends on unseen filters, layers of memory, language, and habit that cloak the raw reality beneath. When those filters lift, the world feels strange, mysterious, almost magical. So tonight, if your eyes fix on an object and it shifts into something alien, don't worry. You are simply peeling back the veil. Seeing the world not as you know it, but as it truly is, an endless mosaic of shapes and textures, waiting to be noticed again for the very first time. Imagine sitting quietly, replaying a single moment over and over in your mind, a conversation, a glance, a decision. Each time, you revisit every word, every gesture, hoping that by remembering more clearly, you might somehow change what happened. You search for missed clues, for better responses, for a different outcome. This is the memory rehearsal repetition, a mental loop where perfect recall is mistaken for the power to rewrite the past. Our minds are drawn to rehearsal. It's how we learn, how we prepare, how we imagine futures. But when it comes to memories, repetition can become a form of fixation. The brain doesn't just recall, it rebuilds. Each replay is a new construction, a chance to refine or alter the narrative. And sometimes, the urge to revisit stems from regret or longing, the wish that understanding better might undo what once was. Psychologists call this process rumination, especially when it becomes persistent. Instead of offering insight, repeated recall can deepen pain, reinforce mistakes, and trap us in a loop. The irony is that no matter how many times you replay the scene, the past remains unchangeable. Memory is not a time machine. It is a storyteller. In ancient traditions, sages taught the wisdom of release, of letting go rather than clinging. They understood that the past is fixed, but the mind need not be captive. Rehearsal, when balanced, strengthens learning. When unbalanced, it creates a maze without exit. So when you find yourself going over the same moment again, pause. Recognize the rehearsal for what it is, a desire to heal, to understand, to find peace. But also remember that true change comes not from perfect recall, but from the grace to move forward. You feel a tear slide down your cheek. Quiet at first, then more. A sudden cascade, as if your body has turned on the faucet without warning. But inside, there is no sorrow, no grief, no familiar ache. The flood flows, yet the heart remains strangely dry, disconnected. It's as if the tears belong to someone else, a different mind entirely. This is the emotionless cry reflex, a paradox where the physical act of crying emerges without the emotional fuel that usually drives it. The tear ducts respond, but the feeling behind them is absent or numbed, leaving a hollow sensation that confuses the body and mind alike. Neurologists attribute this to the complex relationship between emotional processing centers and autonomic reflexes. Sometimes, after intense stress or prolonged emotional suppression, the brain systems become uncoupled. The body responds automatically, while the conscious mind is detached or shut down. In psychology, this phenomenon appears in dissociative states, grief blocked by shock, or exhaustion so deep that feelings seem inaccessible. The body remembers how to cry, but the heart is too overwhelmed or disconnected to feel. It is a silent scream in the language of tears. Many cultures recognize crying as a sacred act, a release, a cleansing. Yet when tears come without feeling, it challenges our understanding of vulnerability. Imagine a river flowing beneath frozen ice, movement without warmth, a quiet surrender without passion. Picture yourself sitting alone in a dim room, your face wet with tears, but your mind still, empty. The tears are real, but the story behind them is lost, slipping between consciousness and reflex. The emotionless cry. Reflex reminds us that sometimes the body mourns before the soul can catch up. And even when feelings are silent, the tears speak their own quiet language. You feel a rush of happiness, warmth spreading softly through your chest, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of your lips. It is real, it is gentle, but almost immediately a shadow creeps in. The fear that this joy is fragile, that it will slip away as quickly as it came. A sudden panic blooms beneath the surface, unspoken and urgent, and in that fear of losing happiness, you find it beginning to fade. This is the joy anomaly delay, a paradox of emotion where the very act of fearing loss causes the loss itself. Happiness appears, bright and fleeting, but once your mind turns to its impermanence, the experience fractures. The present joy dissolves under the weight of anticipation, leaving behind a hollow ache where contentment once lived. Psychologists note how our awareness of impermanence colors every feeling. Joy is not merely experienced, it is watched, guarded, analyzed. And this self-monitoring can create a feedback loop, where anxiety feeds on happiness, dimming its light. Imagine holding a delicate flame in your hand. The moment you worry it might go out, you tighten your grip, and the flame flickers and dies. This tension between craving and fear becomes the silent thief of joy. Yet, this anomaly also teaches a profound truth, that joy is fragile, yes, but also that it thrives best in presence, without the weight of worry. It asks you to let go, to simply feel without expectation. So when happiness arrives, and you sense the panic lurking, breathe gently. Let the moment be as it is, without fear or resistance, because sometimes the secret to holding joy is in not trying to hold it at all. Imagine sitting at your desk, your hands busy and your mind focused. You reach for your pen, your eyes scan the page, and yet suddenly you realize you've lost the thread. The idea you were following dissolves. The purpose of your action slips away, leaving behind only an empty moment. You wonder, what was I doing? Where did the thought go? This is the attention anchor collapse, a quiet unraveling where the mind releases its grip on focus, and the thread of concentration unspools into nothingness. It happens more often than we notice. A subtle surrender of mental tension, a release of the anchor holding your awareness steady. Neurologists explain that attention relies on a network of brain regions that work together to sustain focus. When these systems falter, through fatigue, distraction, or stress, the anchor slips. The mind drifts, and the flow of thought breaks. This collapse is not dramatic or alarming. It is a gentle fading, like a candle flame flickering low before darkness. You may find it when you're tired, overwhelmed, or simply caught between tasks. A familiar phrase disappears mid-sentence. A plan evaporates before it's formed. Ancient contemplative practices recognize this too, calling it mental laxity, a natural ebb in the river of consciousness. They teach patience with these moments, inviting us to gently find the thread again without judgment. You might notice it as you move through daily routines, when your mind slips free of the present, drifting to other places. Not quite asleep, not quite awake, a space between focus and forgetfulness. The attention anchor collapse is a reminder that concentration is a fragile gift, that even in moments of forgetfulness, the mind quietly resets, preparing to gather its threads once more. You're sitting quietly, perhaps in a dim room or late at night, when suddenly, your name, a soft whisper, a faint call, just beyond the edge of hearing. You turn your head, but no one is there. The silence stretches back, empty and still. This is the auditory ghost field, a subtle trick of the brain, where phantom voices echo in the quiet. Not hallucinations, not messages from beyond, but gentle misfires of neural activity designed to check if you're still paying attention. Scientists believe these fleeting whispers arise from your brain's constant vigilance, a background process scanning for signals amid noise. Your name is a powerful trigger, deeply wired to grab your awareness. So even in silence, your mind might generate a sound just familiar enough to draw your focus, a ghostly test to ensure you remain alert. Across cultures, such experiences have been woven into stories of spirits and unseen watchers. Modern neuroscience explains them as harmless quirks, like a smoke alarm that goes off when no fire exists, simply because it senses a hint of something unusual. Imagine your brain as a radio, tuned to many channels. Sometimes, static crackles into a brief, meaningful word. It's a reminder that even in stillness, your mind hums with life, searching, anticipating, never fully at rest. So tonight, if you hear that whispered call, don't startle. It's your mind's way of saying, I'm here, I'm listening. Let the voice fade softly into the dark, a quiet companion on the edge of sleep. Imagine blinking slowly, and as your eyes open, the world has shifted. Colors seem duller, edges blur softly, and sounds lose their usual clarity. The vibrancy you took for granted, the sharp outlines of a leaf, the bright glint of sunlight, now feels muted, as if the contrast and saturation of reality itself have dipped below your mind's threshold for vividness. This is the reality sharpness fade, a fleeting moment when the world seems less real, like a photograph slowly losing focus. Our perception of reality depends on countless subtle cues: light intensity, color saturation, texture, sound clarity, all stitched together seamlessly by the brain. But this seamlessness requires constant renewal. Tiny shifts in attention, fatigue, or neurological states can temporarily dull these signals, leaving us with a softened, dreamlike world. Neurologists link this sensation to moments of mild sensory deprivation or transient cortical hypoactivation. When the brain's processing slows, the richness of experience fades, creating a sense of unreality or detachment. It's a phenomenon closely related to depersonalization and derealization experiences, where the familiar world suddenly feels strange and distant. Yet, this fade is usually brief, a blink's length or a moment's breath, and then sharpness returns. The world snaps back into focus, colors bloom, and sounds regain texture. The return feels like a subtle awakening, a reminder of how fragile and dynamic our experience of reality truly is. Artists and poets have long sought to capture this sensation, the fragile boundary between dream and wakefulness, between presence and absence. The reality sharpness fade reminds us that our grasp on the world is delicate, always balanced on the edge of perception. So next time you notice the world slipping softly from vividness, let it be a quiet invitation to pause, to breathe, and to marvel at the shimmering, ever-changing nature of the reality you live in. You stand at a crossroads, a choice before you, small or large, and yet you hesitate. Not because you fear the consequences or the pain that might come after. No, you stop yourself simply to hold on to the feeling of not regretting, to preserve the fragile, untouched idea of perfection in indecision. This is the regret preservation reflex, a quiet impulse to avoid the risk of regret by never fully committing to any path. It's less about fear of failure and more about clinging to the possibility that, without a choice, regret can never touch you. The potential remains pure, unblemished. The what if becomes a sanctuary rather than a torment. Cognitive psychologists describe regret as a future-oriented emotion, one that arises not just from what happened, but from what could have happened. The mind constantly replays scenarios, weighing alternative outcomes. To sidestep this mental churn, some freeze themselves in place, guarding the fragile illusion of flawless potential. Philosophers have long wrestled with this paradox of choice. Kierkegaard called it the dizziness of freedom, the vertigo that accompanies endless possibility, and the temptation to never leap, simply to avoid falling. In modern times, this reflex shows in decisions delayed, paths unexplored, lives paused in quiet limbo. Imagine yourself standing on a shore, watching waves approach but never stepping into the water. The untouched surface reflects your face clearly, unmarred, pristine, yet the risk of regret keeps you still, holding tight to the mirror of what might be rather than embracing the flow of what is. The regret preservation reflex is a subtle guardian, protecting you from pain by denying experience, but it reminds us too that regret only arrives after a choice, and sometimes the greatest risk is never to decide at all. Without warning, a memory crashes into your mind, a sudden burst of sound, image, or feeling. It's loud, sharp, and unwanted. You didn't call it forth, yet it arrives uninvited, demanding attention. Despite your resistance, your mind replays it again and again, like a scratched record stuck on a painful track. This is the thought intrusion replay, a mental glitch where memories or thoughts invade your awareness uncontrollably, often carrying distress or discomfort. You try to push it away, but the harder you resist, the more persistent it becomes. A haunting echo that refuses to fade. Neuroscience links these intrusions to the brain's mechanisms for processing trauma and emotion. Sometimes memories are improperly filed, trapped in loops that defy closure. The mind, searching for resolution or understanding, forces the memory to replay, hoping to rewrite its meaning. But without release, it remains stuck, a ghost looping endlessly. Psychologists note how this phenomenon can occur in stress, anxiety, or grief, but everyone experiences intrusive thoughts at some point. They reveal the fragility of memory and the thin line between remembering and reliving. Imagine a door slammed open by a gust of wind. You try to close it, but it swings wide again, carried by the storm. That door is your mind, struggling to keep peace amidst chaotic echoes. Though painful, these replays remind us that the mind is always working, sometimes imperfectly, to protect, to warn, to heal. So when the unwanted memory bursts forth and you feel trapped in its loop, remember this: you are not the memory. You are the watcher, and one day the storm will settle. Imagine sitting quietly when suddenly a wave of feeling washes over you, intense, unmistakable, but you can't place its origin. It lingers like a scent in the air, familiar yet untethered. You search your mind for a reason, a memory, a trigger, but find only shadows. The emotion is real, but its source remains hidden, elusive. This is the shadow emotion effect, a subtle phenomenon where feelings arise without clear connection to current events or conscious thoughts. Like echoes from a distant cave, these emotions drift into awareness unanchored, leaving you puzzled and adrift. Neuroscientists explain that our brains hold emotional memories deeply, often beneath the level of conscious recall. Sometimes, a cue too faint or abstract to recognize will awaken these buried feelings. The result is an emotional response without an obvious cause, an apparition of the heart. Psychologists note that these shadow emotions can be residues from past experiences, unresolved conflicts, or even inherited emotional patterns. They are part of the mind's vast undercurrent, shaping mood and perception in ways we rarely see. You may have felt this in moments of unexplained sadness, sudden anxiety, or unexpected joy, when the feeling is vivid but the reason remains a mystery. Like a scent carried on the wind, it stirs something deep within, but slips away before you can grasp it. Ancient traditions speak of this as emotional shadows, reminders that not all feeling is rooted in the present. They encourage gentle curiosity and patience, allowing the shadow to pass without forcing clarity. The shadow emotion effect invites you to sit quietly with the unknown, to trust that some feelings speak in whispers, and that understanding will come in time, or not at all. You drift into sleep and find yourself living another life, walking in unfamiliar shoes, speaking different words, feeling emotions that don't quite belong. In your dream, you are someone else entirely. A stranger, yet somehow familiar. The lines of your own identity blur, dissolve, and shift like sand beneath a tide. Then morning comes. You open your eyes, but the question lingers. Which version of you is real? The person who awoke, or the one who lived so vividly in the night? The dream self feels as authentic as the waking self, complete with hopes, fears, and memories that fade like mist but leave their mark. This is the identity dream displacement, a phenomenon where the boundaries of self soften during dreaming, allowing alternate selves to arise. Neuroscience shows that the brain in sleep rewires networks of memory and emotion, blending fragments of past, present, and imagination into new tapestries of being. Philosophers have long pondered the nature of selfhood, asking if identity is fixed or fluid. Dreams challenge the notion of a singular you, revealing instead a layered, shifting mosaic of selves, each as real in its moment as the next. Imagine waking from a dream where you were a different person, only to find traces of that life echoing in your waking thoughts. The edges of reality blur, inviting you to question what it truly means to be. Tonight, as you fall asleep, embrace this gentle displacement. Let your mind wander through alternate versions of yourself without judgment. For in the endless dance of identity, every self you meet is part of the whole, a quiet reminder that you are vast, mysterious, and beautifully unbound. You tell a story, casually referencing last year, but as you speak, a subtle unease creeps in. The event you're recalling feels distant, older, maybe 5 years past. The timestamp in your mind falters, drifting away from accuracy without warning or consent. Memory, normally your trusted anchor, suddenly misfires. This is the time anchor misfire, a quiet disruption in the way we locate memories in time. Our brains do not store experiences like neatly labeled files. Instead, memories live in webs of associations, emotion, and context. When the mind retrieves them, it must reconstruct the timeline, and sometimes that reconstruction slips, blending dates and durations without permission. Cognitive research shows how fragile our temporal mapping can be. Under stress, fatigue, or distraction, the mind's sense of when becomes blurred. We might conflate one birthday with another, or misplace a childhood event in adulthood. The emotional weight of a memory often overrides the clock, stretching or shrinking time like elastic. Historically, oral cultures relied on stories passed down through generations, where precise timing was less important than meaning. Even ancient philosophers recognized time's fluidity. Heraclitus claimed, "You cannot step into the same river twice, and time itself is ever shifting." Imagine yourself recounting a memory with confidence, only to feel the ground shift beneath the timeline. The year slides like sand through your fingers, escaping the grasp of certainty. You hesitate, adjust your words, and wonder how your mind chose this moment to falter. The time anchor. Misfire reminds us how malleable memory truly is, not a fixed record, but a living story, rewritten each time we recall it. And in that flux, reality softly bends beneath our feet. You catch your reflection in a window or mirror, a familiar face staring back. Yet, instead of recognition, a pause arises. Not because your appearance has changed, but because, in that moment, you forget what it feels like to be truly seen. The image is known, yet somehow strange, like meeting yourself for the first time, or after a long absence. This is the recognition pause illusion, a subtle disconnect between self and reflection that unsettles not the eyes, but the soul. The mirror holds a face shaped by years, but the feeling of recognition, the deep resonance of "I am here," falters. You hesitate, caught between familiarity and estrangement. Psychologists describe this as a momentary breakdown in self-awareness, where the automatic recognition circuits quiet, allowing a glimpse of the self as an object rather than a subject. The reflection becomes a stranger, not in physical form, but in emotional presence. Philosophers have long explored this liminal space between self and other. The feeling that the I inside cannot always align with the image outside, that being seen and seeing oneself are acts that require attention, connection, and presence. Sometimes this pause is fleeting. Other times it stretches, folding into moments of loneliness, fatigue, or deep introspection. It reminds you that identity isn't static, but fluid, shaped by perception, memory, and feeling. So when you look in the mirror and find yourself momentarily forgotten, don't rush past. Pause, breathe, and remember that being seen is a gift, both given and received, one you can rediscover again and again. Imagine a quiet moment when a wave of sorrow washes over you, not for someone you knew, nor for a loss you lived, but for a presence you never met. Or perhaps for a future that never unfolded, a path never taken, a story never told. It's grief without a face, mourning without an event, an ache deep and familiar, as if your soul carries a memory not your own. This is the deep familiar grief, a haunting emotion that defies clear origin. It's the sense of missing something essential that you can neither name nor touch. Grief untethered from person or place, yet profoundly felt. Psychologists speak of ambiguous loss, a form of mourning without closure, often tied to absence that cannot be defined. But this grief goes even further. It reaches into the shadowy spaces between memory and imagination, blurring lines between what was and what might have been. Philosophers and poets have long described this feeling, the ache for a home you never found, a love that slipped through time, a world just out of reach. Carl Jung called it a connection to the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of experience and emotion that transcends individual life. You may feel it in moments of quiet solitude, when the heart pulls toward an unnamed void. It is a grief that whispers of loss beyond the personal, reaching into the timeless and universal. This sorrow is both mysterious and intimate, a reminder that longing is not always for what was, but for what could never fully be. The deep, familiar grief teaches that some losses live in the spaces between reality and dream, soft shadows that shape our deepest selves. You wake up expecting a good day, rehearsing smiles in the mirror, imagining laughter and light. Or maybe you brace yourself for hardship, preparing your heart for sorrow and struggle. You have a forecast, an emotional weather report carefully charted in your mind. But then, the day unfolds differently. The joy you anticipated feels muted, like distant thunder fading away. Or the sadness you prepared for never arrives, leaving a hollow space where pain was expected. Your brain's emotional forecast, so carefully drawn, is off. This is the emotion forecast error, the surprising gap between what we expect to feel and what we actually experience. Scientists call it affective forecasting bias. Our minds overestimate how long or how deeply emotions will last. We predict storms that pass quickly or sunrises that fail to brighten the horizon. Through history, humans have learned to prepare for emotional weather, rituals of mourning, celebrations of joy, but the internal climate remains elusive. Our feelings are fluid, shaped by countless subtle influences, from chance encounters to shifting thoughts. Imagine planning a picnic under clear skies, only to find clouds gathering unexpectedly, or waiting for rain that never comes. The mind's predictions are only guesses, colored by hope, fear, memory, and imagination. Tonight, as you settle into quiet, remember this. Your emotions are not fixed forecasts, but living landscapes, always changing, always new. Let go of expectations. Allow the day's feelings to arrive unbidden, like gentle rain or soft sunlight, and find peace in the unpredictability of your heart's weather. Imagine looking in a mirror or recalling yourself from yesterday and believing you are exactly the same, unchanged, steady, the familiar you. Yet beneath that comforting certainty, everything about you has shifted. Your body has replaced billions of cells. Your brain has rewired countless connections, and your thoughts have morphed in subtle and profound ways. This is the still self-illusion, the paradox of feeling static while endlessly transforming. Science tells us that the human body is a ceaseless flow of renewal. Skin cells shed and regrow within weeks. Your stomach lining replaces itself every few days. Neurons form new pathways, prune old ones, and adjust to new experiences. Even memories, the building blocks of identity, are not fixed snapshots but fluid reconstructions. Despite this constant flux, your sense of self feels stable. This stability is a psychological necessity, a thread of continuity woven from memory, belief, and narrative. It anchors you in a world that demands consistency. Philosophers from Heraclitus to modern thinkers have pondered this paradox. You cannot step into the same river twice. The river flows, and so do you. Yet the you who exists now carries echoes of the past while shaping a future self, never fully the same, never entirely different. This illusion of stillness offers comfort, but also invites wonder. How much of you is constant? How much is change? Perhaps the self is less a fixed entity and more a dynamic dance of change and continuity, a melody where every note is both new and familiar. So next time you feel certain of who you are, remember, beneath that certainty, you are reborn, minute by minute, thought by thought, cell by cell. And in that eternal becoming, the true mystery of self quietly unfolds. As your eyes grow heavy and the world begins to blur, a thought rises quietly from the depths of your mind, not urgent or loud, but soft, like a whisper slipping through a hollow hall. It returns again and again, gently circling, refusing to fade into the shadows of sleep. This is the final thought reverb, the lingering echo of an idea or feeling that clings to consciousness as the boundary between wakefulness and dreams dissolves. It's neither fully present nor completely gone, suspended in a surreal space where time stretches and bends. Neuroscientists describe this phenomenon as the brain's last conscious ripple before surrendering to sleep. Certain neural networks, especially those tied to memory and emotion, remain active longer than others, looping fragments of thought like a melody on repeat. These echoes can carry meaning, a worry, a wish, a memory, or simply the residue of the day's mental noise. In many cultures, the moments before sleep were considered sacred. Ancient Greeks spoke of Hypnos, the god of sleep, whose touch invited the mind to drift between worlds. The persistent thought is like a final visitor, a messenger that won't be ignored, gently guiding you into deeper rest or offering a glimpse beyond. Imagine yourself lying still, the room dark and silent, while this soft echo reverberates inside your head. It's familiar, yet strange, comforting, yet elusive. You don't chase it, nor resist. It simply flows, weaving through the quiet spaces between breaths. The final thought reverb reminds us that even as consciousness fades, some part of the mind holds on, to meaning, to memory, to the quiet pulse of existence, echoing softly into the night.